This is the December 17th, 2024 regular meeting of the Chatham County Savannah Metropolitan Planning Commission. The Planning Commission consists of Ms. Karen Cherry, Chairwoman, Mr. Travis Coles, Vice Chairman, Mr. Tom Wildwoody, Secretary, Ms. Lorraine Bowles, Treasurer. Board members are Mr. Dwayne Stevens, Ms. Tracy Amma, Mr. Joseph Irvine, Mr. Michael Kagler, Ms. Amanda Wilson, Mr. Jay Melder, Mr. Jeff Nortricia, Mr. Joseph Welch, Ms. Corinne Ross, and Mr. Stephen Pluck. The MPC Executive Director is Melanie Wilson.
I'm going to call this December 17th regular meeting of the Chatham County Savannah Metropolitan Planning Commission will now come to order. We'll pause for the Pledge of Allegiance, if you'd stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. For staff, petitioners, and members of the public who are participating, our procedures will be as follows. The agenda is broken down into several parts. First, notices, proclamations, and acknowledgments. Next, the consent agenda, which consists of items for which the applicant is in agreement with the staff recommendation and there are no known objections. This will be followed by regular business, old business, and adjournment. For each agenda item on regular business, the staff will make a presentation. The staff presentation will then be followed by a presentation from the petitioner, should they elect to do so. The petitioner will be allotted a time frame of no more than 20 minutes. The board may then ask questions of the petitioner or staff for clarification. Afterwards, the floor will be open for public comment. If you wish to comment on the item that the board is considering at the time, members of the public that are in person must fill out a speaker card, a little blue speaker card, and give it to staff. If you're participating virtually, thank you, Ms. Helm. If you're participating virtually, use the raise your hand feature on the screen. Do not use the feature until the item you want to comment on is being considered. At the appropriate time, you will be recognized and staff will unmute your microphone. At the end of your allotted time, as determined by the chair, your microphone will be muted and the chair will recognize the next speaker. The total public comment time will be less than or equivalent to the petitioner's presentation time. Therefore, for those participating online, it is important that you use the raise your hand feature during the hearing on that item if you want to speak on a petition. Once the floor is closed for public comment on a petition, no additional public speakers will be allowed. If you are not certain you want to speak, still use the raise your hand feature, or if in person, fill out the speaker card. You will have the option to decline when your name is called. After public comment, the speaker or the petitioner will have the opportunity for rebuttal and then address any additional needed questions by the board. Finally, the board will take action. And the first item on the agenda today is approval of the agenda.
Calls motion to approve.
Urban second.
All in favor, voice vote?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Notices, proclamations, and acknowledgments. We have a swearing in this morning. I'm going to go ahead and very briefly, we have had a finance committee meeting earlier today. I'm sorry?
We haven't had this work.
I know. And a personnel committee meeting, and no decisions were made, but I guess we'll go ahead and move forward with our swearing in if the judge is ready. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for having me here. I appreciate it very much. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be here, unlike last year, on time. I don't know if any of y'all remember, but last year I came in a little bit out of breath and in a frenzy because I had to sort of take a break from a murder trial that was going on and get here in order to get this done. And I'm glad to do it more at my leisure than last year because the trial wrapped up last week this time, so we're good to go now. And I'm happy to be able to do this as always. I was thinking to myself as I came in that I used up everything I could say about the MPC the first 2 times I did this, and what was I possibly going to say this time. So I tried to come up with a couple of things, and one of them occurred to me while I was at lunch before I came here, because we went to lunch on Broughton Street with my staff like we do every year around this time to just sort of celebrate and appreciate everything, all the work everybody's done over the course of the year. And we ate lunch at a restaurant on Broughton Street that, as it happens, used to be the location of the store that my grandparents ran on Broughton Street in sort of its glory, its first sort of golden age. You know, when Broughton Street was all this retail and all its sort of Art Deco glory. The store is now on Haversham Street. It's run by my aunt and uncle who have continued to run. It's called Punch and Judy, a children's clothing store or children's store. But I was in the old Punch and Judy today eating lunch in what is now a restaurant. We had a very good time there, and it struck me how much of the details they were able to preserve inside and out in that store, and it kind of occurred to me that that's sort of a little bit of what the MPC does in microcosm right there is, you know, preserve what's great and the historic nature of our great city and community while also making sure that there is progress. And it's not always easy, and I know that a lot of times at least you'll have a thankless job in that you have to make decisions that is going to end up leaving somebody unhappy. That is a situation that I am familiar with myself, and so I know it's not always easy, so I want to thank you all for what you do here, because it's not an easy job, and you know, you inevitably end up with some people unhappy with you, and it's hard to do that sometimes, but you know, I appreciate the work you do, and it's sort of unsung what you all do, but it is so important to the fabric of our community, and I want to thank all of you for doing that. And so it's my understanding now that I'm to administer the oath not only to the officers, but also to the entire board, and I think I've got one oath, and I would just ask that everybody, if you would please stand up and raise your right hands, and I'm going to read the oath myself, and then at the end you can each say, "I do." And here we go. Do you each solemnly swear that you hold no position of public trust or private interest which places you in a position of conflict of purpose with the Charter of the Metropolitan Planning Commission, and that in accordance with the constitutions of the United States and the state of Georgia, the laws of the state, and all applicable local ordinances, you will faithfully discharge your duties as officers and members of said commission, deciding each matter that shall come before the commission on its merits alone, without fear of favor with regard to any affected parties or agencies? Please answer with "I do."
I do.
Thank you very much, and congratulations to everybody. And I think that's it for me, folks. I'll let you get on with your meeting, but thank you again for inviting me. Thank you for everything you do, and congratulations, and I wish everybody a very pleasant holiday season. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. There are no items that were requested to be removed from the final agenda. And if my fingers will work here. No items requested to be withdrawn from the agenda. The consent agenda has 3 items on it. One is the approval of the November 19th, 2024 meeting minutes. There's a major subdivision, Oakwood at New Hampstead, Phase 2B, 24-006015-SUBP. Is there anyone here who wanted to speak on that item? All right. The other one is a major subdivision, Hill Durance West Track, 3, 4, and 5, 24-006442-SUBP. Anyone here to speak on that item? All right, I'll entertain a motion.
Call this motion to approve the consent agenda.
Urban, second.
All in favor, voice vote?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, there is no old business. A regular business, the first item is a site plan variance for 7822 Abercorn Street.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. This is Edward Morrow, Director of Development Services here.
the MPC. I'm going to speak to you briefly today about a petition that is at the intersection of White Bluff and Abercorn, just adjacent to Oglethorpe Mall. If I can get my screen here. And so on your screen, you can now see an aerial view of the subject parcel. Again, to orient everyone, we are just next to Oglethorpe Mall, Hunter Airfield. So a very prominent location here. You'll remember it as that Golden Corral that's no longer there, and the apartments that are coming up right next door. The future land use map indicates that this is to be used for regional commercial, and the present zoning of this particular site is BC, or community business, and we're here because of that RMF 225 zoning that is just next door. And what we're attempting to do, going back to look at this rezoning that occurred about 3 years ago now, there was an apartment developer who approached with an idea to develop some apartments, and at that time, I can speculate that they were unsure of who these out-parcel users would be. And so as these individual users have now been identified and they've begun to come in, we're trying to figure out how to make our current standards kind of fit within the context of now identified users. And so what we're looking at is site plan specific variances for out parcels 2 and 3, which will become a Chick-fil-A restaurant. Just to give everybody an overview, all of these sites are actively in review right now in various stages. Of course, you can see the apartments coming up. Very soon you will begin to see a Jim and Nick's Barbecue, a Chick-fil-A, and a Valvoline also coming out of the ground. But we're looking specifically at the Chick-fil-A today. And so we're here because you are citing a restaurant next to apartments. And our buffers, our dissimilar use buffers, the idea is that you are going to create a space and ideally a screen of some sort so that you are not looking at something that could potentially be a noxious use adjoining ideally a residence or some other lesser intense use. And so that's the purpose of these buffers. And the petitioner is today asking for a modified type B buffer, which is required when you're putting a restaurant next to apartments. And so you have 3 options for satisfying that requirement. Those 3 are here at the top of the screen. The first being a 15-foot buffer with a 6-foot wall or fence, 20-foot buffer with a 6-foot hedgerow, or a 30-foot buffer with no additional obscuring devices required. Beneath that, you can see the plantings that are required per 100 feet. And so the diagrams below show kind of the intent illustrated of the ordinance. And so because the petitioner would not like to place a wall, a fence or a wall, ideally they would be placing this 20-foot buffer with a 6-foot hedgerow so that you would be able to have kind of some permeability between the restaurant users that are coming out there and the apartment users. And so we kind of felt that this was the best look for the aesthetic of this area as it's built out. And so here is the concept plan that's been provided. Just for reference, the red line that you see typically would represent about 24 feet. That would be the width of a two-way drive. And so if you take that, everywhere that you see these plantings, I'm not sure, can you all see the tip of my cursor? Okay. Everywhere that you would see these plantings, the idea is that you would have that 20-foot buffer, 20 feet being, again, roughly a little bit less than what that red line is. And so you can see, because of the shape of this parcel, there is a bit of an issue here in meeting a 20-foot buffer. Not only that, you could see that if there were, which actually this driveway is likely okay, but some of these other driveways, there would just be some difficulty because of the shape of the parcel in adhering to that requirement strictly. And so what you see is a proposal from this petitioner as to how they can meet those buffer standards in a modified manner. What you're still seeing would likely meet the Park and Tree Department's requirement with regard to landscape quality points and things of that nature. So the plantings are still there, even though the buffer is being requested to be modified. Just so everyone can see with regard to the buffer in particular, they are still meeting their planning standards. And for the other aspects of the landscape, they are still intending to actually exceed what the requirements of the ordinance would be. So again, not necessarily to take away landscaping, just to accommodate the unique shape of the site. Staff does recommend approval, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you. Is the applicant here?
I'm not sure. I know they are a firm out of Atlanta, and we have been corresponding.
Are they online?
I do have someone online. Is the name Andre Wilson?
That's right. There we go.
All right, if you'd state your name for the record, and you can go ahead.
Good afternoon, my name is Andrew Wilson. I'm with Bowman, the civil engineers for Chick-fil-A.
Do you have anything that you wanted to add, or?
Just that I appreciate the presentation by Edward there. That's exactly right. I agree with everything that he's saying. Our hope here is we've got that pinch point where we will not be able to provide the buffer, but by allowing us to modify this buffer here, we'll have a more safely circulated parking lot as well. So it's our hope that you will consider this relief in the form of variance today.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant or for staff? Go ahead.
I have a question for the applicant. Would you be willing to put in like a half concrete wall where that pinch point is, just to divide the parking lot and the perimeter road?
Yes, if that would be needed, we can certainly accommodate.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Any discussion? I don't see that there's any citizens who want to speak on this item. Motion?
Coles make the motion to approve staff's recommendation with the addition of including a half concrete wall where that pinch point is.
Irvin, second.
All right. Ms. Amick?
Yes.
Ms. Bowles?
Yes.
Mr. Coles? Yes. Mr. Irvin?
Yes.
Mr. Kegler?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Notrika?
Yes.
Ms. Ross?
Yes.
Mr. Steve, no, just step back out. Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Woody?
Yes.
I too say yes, motion passes. All right, our second agenda item is site plan variances for 505 West 36th Street.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, Edward Morrow again. So this is an additional petition in association with the redevelopment of the Kaya House Museum for the subject parcel at 505 West 36th Street. And in the course of this restoration, the petitioner requires, I believe, either 5 or 6 variances, 3 of which you are hearing today, and the remainder of which will be heard by the ZBA in relation to the caretaker dwelling on Thursday. But the first 3 to be considered today are a reduction of the off-street parking requirement from 7 spaces to 2 in association with the museum use, to reduce mechanical equipment setback from 3 feet to 1 feet 8 inches, and to reduce the side yard setback from 10 feet to 1 feet 8 inches. Obviously, this was originally developed as a single-family residence, and so it is in relation to that particular constraint that I think a number of these variances arise. In particular, it's the restoration of an existing non-conforming structure, and so that side setback is more so relief from conformity. And then also there's an addition that is proposed in order to facilitate the movement of patrons throughout this structure as a commercial facility, because again, this structure began its life as a single-family residence. Ward Architecture is bringing this petition forward on behalf of the Civis Foundation and the City of Savannah that are partnering to redevelop the Kaya House. And so the project essentially aims to rediscover the social and cultural significance of the Kaya Museum through the lens of contemporary creative expression that entertains, educates, and inspires visitors to embrace the surrounding community as their own. There are a number of programs that are anticipated. And so, sorry, just to offer you some visuals here. Got ahead of myself. Here is the site plan that I'd like you to see. So this is the home itself. This is an addition that will facilitate that movement of guests throughout the property. The caretaker's dwelling that is not being addressed today, but most significantly, you can see, if you recall, 2 Chef's Gullah, this structure. That restaurant is no longer there, but the structure is being restored in association to kind of bring these 2 parcels together and to facilitate this idea of kind of the revitalization of the museum experience. And so the request actually treats this parcel individually. You can see one off-street parking space for the caretaker's dwelling, and there's also one additional off-street parking space that's to be provided. But in addition to that, to be used with this, you will have 2 additional parking spaces on this adjoining parcel. Again, not in the scope of today's request, but specifically, we are looking at this setback, the reduction of this setback, the mechanical equipment, which will be within its required setback, and then also to reduce the off-street parking requirement associated with the museum use to these 2 spaces that are on the parcel itself. Again, just because I got a little ahead of myself, we are consistent with the future land use map and with zoning. You can see that this was previously amended to reflect the future land use of traditional commercial, and the parcel was recently rezoned to TC1 to support the museum use. That is also the only permissible use within the TC1 district. So, with that, MPC staff does recommend approval of these 3 requests. The off-street parking reduction, the reduction of the mechanical equipment setback, and also the reduction of the side yard setback from 10 feet to 1 feet 8 inches. I am happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, thank you. Is the petitioner available?
I think Bridget is here. Oh.
Please state your name for the record.
Yes, hello, my name is Josh Ward with Ward Architecture and Preservation. First, I'd like to thank staff for the review of this project. Also, just a couple of small things I want to point out. We have received our approvals from the Historic Preservation Commission for the exterior architectural changes on this project. And finally, of course, I want to point out that we feel that these variances are crucial to the success of this project. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Are there any questions for the applicant or staff? All right, any discussion? And I do have one speaker card, Ms. Adler.
I'm Sue Adler. I'm the CEO of Historic Savannah Foundation. I want to thank you all for your work. The Historic Savannah Foundation supports this application as it was submitted today to seek approval for these 3 variances. The commencement of the rehabilitation of the Kaya House has been long awaited, and we are excited to see it begin in the new year. We appreciate the staff's thorough review and agree with their recommendations for the appeal. I need not tell you about the significance of this building. It is well known, and so I thank you for your support.
Thank you. All right, any discussion or questions? Motion?
Cole's motion to approve staff's recommendation.
Bowles, second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Ms. Amick?
Yes.
Ms. Bowles?
Yes.
Mr. Coles?
Yes.
Mr. Kegler?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Notrika?
Yes.
Ms. Ross?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
And Mr. Walwoody?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Madam Chair, may I vote yes as well on this
Oh, I'm
item?
sorry, I didn't see you slip
I
in.
came in. Excuse my tardiness.
Thank you, and I too say yes, so motion carries. All right, our next agenda item is special use restaurant with accessory alcohol sales at 1308 Montgomery Street.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, members of the board. Edward Morrow again. This is a request in association with the property at 1308 Montgomery Street. The petitioner has recently received a business location approval to establish a restaurant, and today requests a special use permit, or a recommendation regarding a special use permit from the Metropolitan Planning Commission. This petition will, from here, move forward to City Council for consideration. To orient everyone, we are just south of the park at the intersection of West Henry and Montgomery Streets, and the proposed restaurant, the Henry Street Bistro. You can see in the photo, the Google Street View photo here, this was previously Etta's, so fairly well-known location. The future land use map indicates this property is to be used in association with traditional commercial uses, and the zoning is also TC1, or Traditional Commercial 1. So the request is consistent with both of these. With regard to the request, this is a proposed 165 seat restaurant, again, to be called the Henry Street Bistro. The ordinance defines a restaurant as an establishment that prepares and serves food and beverages to the public whose offerings may or may not include accessory alcohol sales. But most importantly, restaurants derive their revenue, 50% or more of their annual gross sales come from the sales of food and beverage, not necessarily from the sale of alcoholic beverages. And so that's the distinction between a restaurant and other liquor dispensing establishments, essentially. And so the idea today is that this is a restaurant. I just want to make that very clear for the record. Public notice did go out in accordance with the ordinance. There was not a neighborhood meeting because it was not necessarily required. But I can say that I did speak with the neighborhood president, and she conveyed that a prior good neighbor agreement, which was requested by city council, had been signed, and there was a prior approval for a liquor license at one time, which I understand may have lapsed. And so that's the need, in essence, to go through this process again. But even though there was no neighborhood meeting this time, the neighborhood has sent comment regarding their input and their approval with conditions of restricted operating hours. And so with that, MPC staff does recommend approval of this request with two conditions. The first being that the special use permit shall not be transferable. And finally, the establishment shall close by 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and by midnight on Friday and Saturday night, consistent with City Council's prior approval on August 10th, 2023, and the Good Neighbor Agreement signed with the neighborhood. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
Just want to point out that in our recommendation, there's a scrivener's error. It says 12 midnight on Saturday and Sunday.
You are
It should be
correct.
Friday and Saturday. Just want to make sure we correct that before we send that to council.
So actually, I believe that we pushed
Yeah,
out
it is.
the revised report. When you check the agenda now, it should say.
Look at your,
That's correct.
look at your monitor.
Yeah, on the laptop, it says Saturday and Sunday.
I got you. No, you're correct. The report previously said that has been corrected.
Thank you.
All right, is the applicant here? Please state your name for the record.
Good afternoon, Will Claiborne here on behalf of Henry Street Bistro. It appears to me that the only issue that we would request the board here today not limit the hours at this point and leave that determination for City Council. We did attempt to reach out to Victoria Neighborhood Association on a number of different occasions to actually meet with them. I do want to make that clear, and the last correspondence that we received back was that they would not be available to meet until at least after October the 7th, and we're trying to get this business to be able to operate at its full capacity. It is currently open right now as a restaurant only without the liquor license in place. From our perspective, obviously this is a relatively busy corridor at the corner of Henry Street and Montgomery that I think everybody is very familiar with. So the marginal difference of having this business be open from midnight until 2 a.m. on the weekends and from 10 p.m. till midnight on the weekdays is not really going to impact the surrounding businesses, given the high traffic and position of this location already. In addition to that, there are other locations in nearby areas, such as the American Legion, for example, that are open without this type of hours restriction. And so we would just simply ask if the council has any questions with respect, or the commission has any questions with respect to this, that we're happy to answer them here today. But we would ask that the approval be without a limitation as to the hours, in light of the fact that we did attempt to address this issue with the neighborhood association, and also just given the inherent nature of this location and the fact that it's already high traffic and high noise. And I will point out that the previous liquor license that had been approved for this location was actually for a different location with some different ownership, and so shouldn't necessarily be binding on this application, which we're required to understand that the city believes we're required to go through with a brand new application process. So that's our position with respect to it.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant or staff?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Melder.
You mentioned that there's a new owner since City Council last approved the alcohol license, which was never granted because of lack of insurance. Is that right?
I don't know exactly how much you'd like to go into that, but there was actually insurance in place at the time, and so we're not quite sure where that came from. But irrespective of that,
who was the previous owner and who's the owner now?
I'm the owner.
you state your name for the record.
I'm sorry. My name is David Williams, and yes, sir, I did have insurance at the time,
Okay,
and I also have insurance now in place.
good. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? All right.
I have a question for staff. What was the reason for placing the second condition?
So essentially, when we're looking at these, we're looking at appropriateness of this particular use at this location. This is within a zoning district that is within an overlay also, where uses of this nature have a restriction on their operating hours. It's relatively, I understand the specific site happens to be located on a higher volume thoroughfare, but it happens to be within a neighborhood in an overlay that leans slightly less intense, if you will. And so again, it's not necessarily the intensity of the use, but the hours of its operation, that this is consistent with the overlay standards, honestly, for the Victorian overlay and the TN district in which it's located,
Okay, thank you.
if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Other questions? I certainly wanted to ask, previously you agreed to the hours that were stated, correct?
These were hours.
Can you state your name for the record, please? I'm sorry.
David Williams. Well, actually, these were hours without serving alcohol. We were just opening up the business, starting all over brand new.
Okay, but in 2023, you were issued an alcohol license, and the hours at that point in time were from, as they're noted here, correct?
Which were what? I can't recall.
Closed 10 p.m. Sunday through Thursday, and midnight on Friday and Saturday, and that was what the city council had approved in August of 2023?
Yes, again, Will Claiborne on behalf of the applicant, that is correct. However, that was an entirely different application process, and it was applied at the city council level. And so we would just ask that this process be the same this time as last time, and that if the city council wishes to impose that, that determination be made at that level.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And the only reason I asked the same question or related to that was that because it's such a high-traffic area, that I don't see the impact, that, you know, a negative impact because it's such a high-traffic area for having the extended hours. But
My discussion part of that was if city council stated this before, we'll allow them to state it again. That's my opinion on it.
All right. Other discussion? I'll entertain a motion.
Cole's motion to approve staff's recommendation with only condition 1.
Bull second.
All right. Ms. Amick?
Yes.
Ms. Bowles?
Yes.
Mr. Coles?
Yes.
Mr. Irvin?
Yes.
Mr. Kegler?
Yes.
Mr. Melder?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Notrika?
Yes.
Ms. Ross?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
I'm going to abstain, having not heard the whole presentation.
All right. Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Wywoody?
Yes.
I too will say yes. Motion passes. All right, our next item is site plan variance for 0 Preston Drive.
Hi, good afternoon. Anna McQuarrie, planner at the MPC. This is a request for a variance for the impact of 4,110 square feet of existing wetland buffers for the construction of the Preston Drive extension. And so this will allow for a 300-unit multifamily apartment complex located south of Ogeechee Road and to the west adjacent to Chatham Parkway. By permitting this variance, it will allow for the construction of Preston Drive extension with sidewalk and boardwalk necessary for access and egress from the proposed site. Savannah zoning ordinance permits the city manager or his or her designee to approve a modification to the local buffer after making a determination that there is no feasible alternative design that would result in no disturbance to the buffer. The zoning administrator has determined that the current proposal does not meet the standard for administrative modification and requires further variance relief before review of an administratively approved modification. All right, so for our future land use map, we have commercial suburban, and with zoning, it's RMF, residential multifamily, 215. In 2021, there was a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Aquatic Resources Delineation Review. This is required to delineate the wetlands, and once you know where the wetlands are, then you can measure the 35-foot buffer required. As a note, these are freshwater wetlands as opposed to salt marsh, so they're not, Georgia Department of Natural Resources did not determine they were tidally influenced, so freshwater. And last note, this review is good for 5 years. A little history on this parcel. Originally, it was in Chatham County, unincorporated, and it was annexed into the city of Savannah in July of 2022 and rezoned in June of 2023 from planned urban development, community business, to its current zoning district, and the Planning Commission approved the rezoning without conditions. However, in that rezoning, MPC staff did recommend that there would be coordination with Chatham County over stormwater. The MPC approved it without that condition. All right. Okay. And this proposed 300-unit development is below the 15-unit per acre threshold established for the subject property. Okay. Just want to quickly talk about bus routes and stops as it's related to the extension of Preston Drive. So for residential multifamily, there are requirements in this high-density commercial area to have a connection to our bus routes and stops. And so no existing continuous pedestrian right-of-way exists along the dedicated length of Preston Drive. And so Preston Drive would need to connect to the proposed extension to CAT bus stop at Circle K. The applicant proposes to extend and incorporate a 5-foot sidewalk on the west side of the road and an elevated 5-foot boardwalk through the buffer. The northern portion of the property, which we'll show in just a moment, is about 0.2 miles to the closest bus stop, and the southern portion is about 0.3 miles away. The minimum buffer width along the boardwalk is about 9.5 feet, where a wall will be installed. Okay, so let's look at the general development plan. Originally, this was submitted in August. And the applicant was requesting to impact a little over 9,000 square feet of existing wetland buffers. However, this current plan, which you're looking at, is a variance to impact a little over 4,000 square feet of wetland buffers. So we can see the northern portion of the property is here at the top. We have our wetlands in blue. This hash here is the 35-foot buffer. And then the southern portion here is at the bottom. This green area has been designated as protected area to remain undeveloped and undisturbed. Closer look at the buffer here. So there will be 2 points where the buffer will be implicated. And so we have our largest portion here at almost 4,000 square feet total. The wetland comes almost to that proposed boardwalk. And then here, a little bit below, we're over 330 square feet. It's important to note that while we have the wetlands on each side, there's also another feature we need to talk about, and that is this canal here. And this is called the Red Gate Canal. When this property was annexed, the stormwater management on the parcel will be managed by the city of Savannah. However, surrounding this parcel is unincorporated Chatham County, and they are in charge of managing the Red Gate Canal in those portions. This is a mechanically maintained canal. Speaking of stormwater, the applicant submitted a coastal stormwater supplement exhibit. So it shows areas with stormwater ponds with water quality treatment and areas with permeable pavers. Staff is recommending implementing innovative low-impact development strategies where able, and it will be important that the city of Savannah and Chatham County Stormwater coordinate and with their maintenance for the Red Gate Canal because Again, this canal cuts through the county there in this annexed parcel. Great, so let's get into the ordinance review here. So what is the purpose of a wetland buffer? It is to establish, or this ordinance is to establish the buffers, and they have multiple purposes, including they serve as a natural storage area for high waters and absorbing rainfall into the soil, thereby minimizing flooding potential. Serve as sediment and stormwater control mechanism that maintains water quality by filtering suspended solids, nutrients, and harmful or toxic substances from stormwater runoff before it enters nearby waters. It helps to provide clean ground and surface drinking water supplies and maintains the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of open bodies of water. Provides temporary refuge for wetland fauna during high water episodes and critical habitat for animals dependent upon but not resident in wetlands and marshes. Accommodating slight variations of wetland and marsh boundaries over time due to hydraulic or climatologic effects, and it serves as an ecological transition zone to reduce the impacts of development upon wetland and marsh vegetation, wildlife and fish habitats, and nursery areas for fisheries. So you can see in this diagram, you would have a wetland, a buffer, and then your development. So our standards to be varied is the buffer width. There is a minimum of 35 feet required in the city of Savannah. This is measured from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers approved jurisdictional determination and delineation. Prohibited activities and uses within the buffer. Soil disturbance, such as, includes but not as limited to grading, stripping of topsoil, plowing, cultivating, or other similar practices, clearing of vegetation, burning of vegetation, filling, and many others. Permitted activities and uses within the buffer. So land disturbing activities by governments within public right-of-ways existing as effective date of this ordinance are approved under the terms of this section. However, it's important to note that this was not a dedicated right-of-way as effective of the ordinance. So, again, this does not meet the standards to be varied in 10.5.7. So it did not meet any section listed in 10.5.6. A land disturbing activity that results in a reduction of buffer width over a portion of the parcel in exchange for an increase in buffer width elsewhere on the same parcel, provided that the average buffer width on the entire parcel equals 35 feet, and that the buffer width at any given point on the parcel is not less than 25 feet. And provided further that all non-native plants within the disturbed areas are replaced with native plants as identified in the Coastal Riparian Buffer Planting Manual as amended, or the replacement of non-native plants with native plants as identified in the Coastal Riparian Buffer Planting Manual as amended. So this language may come up a little bit later in our recommendations. Okay, so it's important to note, again, we're talking about two features that need to be discussed separately due to the landscape of state and local regulations. So with this canal is considered a state water. We can think of state waters as anything that goes between two parcels. So for example, a pond that is located solely on the site, it is likely not a state water. However, this canal is because, again, it goes along many parcels. It is mechanically maintained. And so reaching out, the Georgia Department of Natural Resources determined the following. Resting of vegetation along this water feature is a result of recent and/or frequent maintenance activities. Therefore, at this location, the resting of vegetation does not meet the definition as in the Georgia Code. There is an established 25-foot buffer along the banks of all state waters as measured horizontally from the point where vegetation has been rested by normal stream flow and/or wave action. There is not a legally defensible point from which to measure the buffer. Therefore, a buffer variance will not be required by EPD according to the rules of the Georgia Department of Natural Resources Environmental Protection Division for erosion and sedimentation control. Rested vegetation means movement of water that removes soil, debris, vegetation, creating a clear demarcation between water flow and vegetation growth. While no state buffer is required, a local jurisdiction may have an ordinance with a more stringent requirement. So that's where we get to the City of Savannah Code, and that is how we are going to talk about our wetland buffer. So just for a refresher, why are wetlands important? According to the Coastal Stormwater Supplement to Stormwater Management, Freshwater wetlands are a high priority because of their value, in particular sensitivity to the direct impacts of the land development process. Roads, parking lots, rooftops, and other impervious surfaces further increase stormwater runoff volume. They offer free ecological services. The manual cites a study from 1998. It's about $370,000 per acre. This is over $700,000 per acre in 2024 dollars, using an inflation calculator. So we know why the wetlands are important, but again, why is the buffer important? How is this different from the wetlands themselves? So they perform many of the same functions, and width is actually a key factor in determining effectiveness. That's why we're giving so much thought to this. They do improve water quality by providing additional room for filtration, and then they protect wetlands and wildlife from noise, pollution, light, and direct human disturbance. When we talk about who are they disturbing, you know, we could just say wildlife, but actually in this area, according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service information for planning and consultation tool, in this area there's likely to be a tricolored bat, eastern black rail, wood stork, eastern indigo stake, monarch butterfly, and pondberry plant. And the monarch butterfly this week was actually proposed to be listed as a threatened species. There are several migratory birds that may be present in this area as well. And finally, let's go to the zoning ordinance review. For general consistency, the applicant increased protected area in the southern portion to meet the intent of 10572, applicability requirements where there's a reduction of buffer width over a portion of the parcel in exchange for an increase of buffer width elsewhere on the same parcel, and disturbed areas are replaced with native plants. Should the application be approved with staff conditions, it will help meet the comprehensive plan natural resource goal 10, proactively manage stormwater runoff. For special conditions, there are 228 square miles of wetlands in Chatham County. This is not a unique or special hardship because much of the county must consider wetlands for development purposes. The requests are necessitated by the developer's chosen design. A portion of the property may be developed without any need for the requested relief. The Army Corps Engineer Aquatic Resources Delineation Review is dated 2021, and the applicant was aware of the wetland areas before the parcel was annexed and rezoned. While the requests are financially motivated, this variance will allow for needed multifamily housing in the city of Savannah. The variance will allow access to approximately 2/3 of the property to provide 300 units of multifamily housing. The buffer variance request is to avoid going through the wetlands. A total of 46.7% of the site, about 14 acres, will be protected from development or are undevelopable due to environmental conditions. The literal interpretation of the regulations would not deprive the applicant of rights commonly enjoyed by other properties in the same zoning district. The project scope may be reduced to the northern portion to eliminate the need for requested relief. To make use of the southern portion, the applicant reduced the buffer encroachment from about 9,000 square feet to 4,000 square feet along the proposed extension of Preston Drive. The applicant worked with MPC staff to reduce buffer encroachment to the minimum necessary to access the southern portion of the parcel and avoid going through wetlands, which you would need a Section 404 Clean Water Act permit for through the Army Corps of Engineers. Approval of the requested variance will confer a degree of special privilege upon the applicant. This property is not unique within the jurisdiction in the application of wetland buffering. However, it may be noted that the wetland buffer requirement only applied upon the annexation of the property. No similar measure exists in Chatham County that would have necessitated the present relief. With this, MPC staff recommends approval of the requested variance for relief from proposed impacts to the delineated wetlands buffer, approximately 4,110 square feet. And we recommend several conditions upon this proposal. Currently, there are 1,360,810 square feet designated as protected area to remain undeveloped and undisturbed on the proposed development condition plat submitted to the MPC on December 10th, 2024, and that will remain undeveloped and undisturbed. The applicant enters into an agreement with Chatham County regarding the review of any development plan specific to access to Chatham Parkway and stormwater discharge into any county-maintained system. The proposed land disturbance will be conducted in accordance with all design guidelines, low-impact development techniques, and other guidance found in the Coastal Riparian Buffer Guidance Manual as amended, and if a decrease in the average buffer width is allowed, then best management practices, or BMPs, must be installed, or flow must be directed to the increased buffer areas as referenced in section 1057A2.
Thank you. Is the applicant here?
I get some help, Sally. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. My name is Robert McCorkle from the law firm McCorkle, Johnson & McCoy. I'm here today on behalf of Hill Point LLC, the developer, as well as S&R Savannah Partners LLC, who is the property owner. We've heard a lot today about, in a very long staff report, about the importance of buffers and about state waters definitions and rested vegetation definitions and all of these things. I'm going to ask you to bear with me a little bit today because this is the deciding body on this variance, and if we appeal it, then we have to have the record completed. And I want to start by saying that we actually support staff's recommendation for approval. We are supportive of the requirements and the conditions that are being placed on it, and we support staff's recommendation for approval with the variance. As far as I'm concerned, I've been involved in this project for various ways over the years. The property consists of 30 acres. 7 of the 30 acres are wetlands. The wetlands buffer that's in the city's ordinance occupies an additional 3 acres of the, over 3 acres of the property, or 10% of the total property. It was annexed in the city in '22, and it was zoned in the city in 2023 from PUD BC to RMF 15, specifically done to remove the intended use, which was a shopping center, to then now have much-needed housing stock for the city. Those zonings and annexations were approved both here at the MPC and at City Council, showing a site plan that is incredibly similar to the one that you're looking today, with the road in the same location as it is on the site plan in front of you, as well as the buildings in the same locations as they are in the site plan in front of you. In connection with the rezoning, this same site plan again was reviewed as a conceptual site plan at the time, but nothing has changed here as far as us hiding the ball, other than actually a reduction in the number of units. The number of units is actually 300 units on the site as a total. They're all 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom units. In total, this is a $50 million project, again, to add 300 units to the site. You can see the site is bifurcated by the wetlands here, and so you've got a northern portion and a southern portion that's referred to in the staff report. There's about 92 units on the northern portion, about 192 units on the southern portion, and about 108 on the northern portion. So the portion that we're talking about having this buffer to access occupies about 200 of the 300 units on the site, more than half of the site. This came up in connection with the submittal of the site plan. This issue came up about the city's wetland buffer. I'll be honest with you, when my client called me and asked me about the wetland buffer, my immediate response to them was, the city of Savannah doesn't have a freshwater wetland buffer. I've been doing this a long time, as y'all know. I've appeared in front of you a long time, many times, as you know, and I have never seen a request for a variance for a wetland buffer from the city. I didn't know it exists because in state law, the state's not allowed to impose freshwater wetland buffers. In addition to that, I've just frankly never seen it. There's a couple of reasons. I've talked to a lot of engineers about this before we got here today. There's a couple of reasons we don't see it. One is because oftentimes large-scale projects that involve impacting wetlands are done through PUDs. And when those PUDs gets approved by this body and by the city of Savannah, the wetland buffer just tends to disappear, or it gets reduced down to a number that is less than what the 35 feet is. I think if you looked at your agenda today and you looked at back and forth through MPC agendas over the past year, you would see numerous PUDs and numerous projects that are approved with reductions in the city's wetland buffer without any discussion in the staff report necessarily, or about discussion in connection with requesting them to ask for a variance. There's lots of discussion in this staff report about wetlands and about the ordinance itself. I've educated myself about this a lot leading up to today. This was a really big issue that came up in 2014 and 15. And in 2014, the EPD took the position, which was consistent with all of their previous actions, that you could not have a state wetlands buffer unless there was rested vegetation. The idea of rested vegetation, as mentioned by staff, is that basically the vegetation is either laid down or torn by wave action or tidal action. So in a freshwater wetland, You don't have rested vegetation. Several environmental groups across the state sued the state of Georgia and the EPD. State was supported by the Georgia Chamber of Commerce and multiple other organizations. There was a large Supreme Court case came out in 2015 that ruled that the state cannot impose a buffer unless there is rested vegetation. The Supreme Court ruled specifically that if the state legislature intended to have freshwater wetland buffers, then they needed to adopt a new code and revise their code in order to allow for it. That was in 2015. It's been 9 years since then. The state has never amended the code to adopt it. And so as it stands right now, there is no freshwater wetland buffer in the state of Georgia. On the subject site, the Georgia EPD has already determined that there is no rested vegetation on this site. In other words, there's no stream or no wave action. I actually went out and walked around in the wetlands a little bit. We'll come back to that site, but we walked around a little bit, and this is actually the area that we're talking about. This is the county's maintenance road, which already exists in the location where we're planning on building this road. And this area to the right here is the area of the wetlands buffer that we will be encroaching to expand the road into a public road. As mentioned by staff, the Georgia EPD stated in their ruling that no legally defensible point from which a buffer may be measured exists. And so therefore there is no buffer, and we're not required to seek a buffer variance from the state. Interestingly, section 10.58 of the city's ordinance states that when a variance is granted by the state to reduce the required state or federal buffer, the local buffer will not be required, or it will be reduced down to the amount of the state buffer. So if there was a state buffer and we had a variance from it, then this buffer would automatically go away. That's another reason you don't see variances here very often, is because we encroach in wetlands on projects all the time. We drive through wetlands all the time. We have to go get buy credits, and when that happens, this buffer just disappears. Interestingly, here, where the state has no buffer and has ruled that they have no buffer, but didn't grant a variance for it, our entire buffer applies. And so we've got a 35-foot buffer to deal with, even though the state has 0. We believe that the application, the point of all of this is that we believe the application of the city's buffer to this property violates the state law. Through the city, basically, as staff noted, they may exceed the state buffer in order to create a wider buffer. They do this with the marsh buffer. The county does it too. There's a 25-foot state marsh buffer for saltwater wetlands. The city extends it by 10 feet, so does the county. Here, the city's not extending the buffer. They're creating a buffer where one does not exist, and therefore we believe it violates the law. We sent a letter to the city manager and to the city attorney this week, or last week, expressing this opinion and reserving the rights of the client because they have no other recourse, frankly, if this appeal is denied. They have no other recourse but to take the position that the application of this onto the site is a taking of the property and violative of the state and the federal constitution for taking without justification and without adequate compensation, because it advances no state interest to have this buffer in place. The state has determined emphatically through the Supreme Court and through the legislative action, which hasn't existed over the last 9 years, that the state is not interested in installing a buffer on freshwater wetlands. But we submitted this to the record. You probably got a copy of it. I have to do that. I apologize for the formality of it, but we have to have a record if this is appealed. With all that being said, we discussed with the city that we are happy to move forward with the appeal because we think in this particular situation, which is very unique to this piece of property, that the appeal makes sense and that we meet the requirements of the ordinance for a variance. The petitioner has worked with staff over the last few months to try to address the concerns. First, they reduced the buffer impact from 9,155 square feet to 4,110 square feet. This is a reduction of more than half of the impact into the buffer. This reduces the extent of the intrusion to the absolute bare minimum that allows this property to be developed. If we can't build a road in this exact location, then the property highlighted in pink here is the property that is not accessible. The total buffer, as mentioned on the entire site, is over 3 acres. The encroachment that we're asking for is less than 1/3 of 1% of that total buffer. A very minor, absolutely minimum possible encroachment. Additionally, we've designated over 3 acres of the parcel to be undisturbed, as was mentioned by staff, is the area declared in green, shown in green here. This area is larger than the entire wetland buffer that applies to the site. So essentially, we are doubling the buffer in the undisturbed area on the site as a mitigation for the less than 1/3 of 1% of that buffer that we are asking to encroach in order to build this public road. Additionally, over 46% of the site is going to remain undisturbed as a whole. This is not a situation where my client is trying to maximize units or build units in the buffer or ask for, that's not what this is. This is simply to put a road in the only location that it can be put in order to be able to access 2/3 of the site. We are only including 300 units on the site, while by right under the zoning, we can have over 400. So this is not a situation where we're maximizing the units. Staff recommended approval of variance, and again, we agree with the conditions. I'd like to take a minute to look at the specific variance requirements that are in front of you today and your considerations as you're doing this. One, is it consistent with the intent of the ordinance and should not be injurious to the neighborhood or otherwise detrimental to public health? We agree with staff that it is not, that it is consistent. We have mitigated the impacts to the by creating additional undisturbed wetland as mentioned. It's also worth noting that this property is not in a flood zone. It is not in a floodplain. We are meeting all water quality requirements. We are achieving 90% runoff reduction, and the peak flow is being reduced from 73 to 43% reduction from what it is currently before the build out. The buildings and the roads on this site are going to be 2 to 3 feet above the 100-year floodplain, or the 100-year storm level for the canal. We plan the entire stormwater for the project. Our engineer of record is here today. We plan the stormwater based on the county's canal system model. It's been sent to the county. It's been resolved in 2 different meetings with the city, been reviewed by 2 different meetings of the city. But it's worth noting that this encroachment into this wetland buffer, which is dry, does not in any way impact any of those numbers. It does not impact the stormwater. It does not impact the flood elevation. It does not impact anything that we're doing in any of those calculations. All of those are true regardless of this impact. Second criteria is whether special conditions and or circumstances exist that are peculiar to the buildings and the structures in the same district. Staff mentioned it's not unique special hardship because much of the county has wetlands, 280 square miles of wetlands in the county. What is a bit unique, because the county doesn't have a freshwater wetland buffer. The city of Savannah does. I would also note that, to my knowledge, no other local jurisdiction around us has a freshwater wetland buffer. Probably because the state doesn't permit it, but that's the way it is. There is no other buffer comparative in other municipalities. So it doesn't apply to every piece of property, and like I mentioned before, most of the time these projects are done through PUDs and through other agreements where these buffers tend to go away. We do have special conditions on this site. Due to the shape of the wetlands on the property, the only place where this property can be accessed is in the current location. This is the encroachment into the wetland buffer. It's right here. As mentioned, if we cannot do this encroachment, we will lose over half of our property, 64% of the units on the site, including 192 total units. I also want to note that Preston Drive is a public road, and this is what it looks like. If any of y'all ever rode back there, this is what Preston Drive looks like. It's already constructed at grade. It has a sidewalk. There was a mention of no sidewalks. It has a sidewalk on both sides of the street all the way up to the property line. This is actually the property line, immediately where this road dead ends. So you can see that the concrete just stopped. The road was constructed for the city to be extended through this piece of property and stops at the exact point with, again, sidewalks on both sides. You can also see in front of you that there's a road there currently, which is a gravel and dirt road that was, I believe, constructed by the county for maintenance of the canal. And it is at grade level. This is not a situation where we're coming in and adding a bunch of dirt. Most of it is already there. This is a picture of the road. You can see the canal running over here on the left. Again, this is the buffer area over here on the right where we have to encroach to widen this. Just to give you a shot again, this is the road in the background on your left. This is the wetlands buffer area. This is not the wetland proper. We agree that wetlands are important. We're not, the whole purpose of us asking for this today is to avoid actually going into the wetlands. Ironically, if we ask for a wetland permit and encroach and buy them, this buffer goes away, but we'd be encroaching in the wetlands. So we're asking for this variance in order to avoid having to encroach in the wetlands, which is, there's an irony to all of this here. In order to try to protect the wetlands, we're being put in a situation where we potentially be forced to encroach into it. Not only is Preston Drive a public road, and not only is there, but the county 3 years ago, I believe, installed about $500,000 concrete culvert crossing at this location. It is directly in front of where Preston Drive ends. It was built to DOT standards. It is 80 feet wide. There was a mention in the pre-meeting that potentially it has to be improved. We have reports from our geotechnical engineers who have studied it. They do not believe any improvements have to be made to it. It was built to DOT standards. They submitted this report to the county in connection with our approval of what we're trying to do with the county. The next one, the special conditions or circumstances do not result from the actions of the applicant. None of these circumstances that exist result from the actions of the applicant. The property and the wetlands are what they are. The road of Preston Drive was built to where it was built. The crossing that the county constructed over the canal was built where it is built. It is the place where we have to cross. You can see, looking at this, the total distance we're talking about is like, I don't know, maybe a couple hundred feet total. And so that's the area where we have to construct this road and brush this wetland buffer on the way by in order to do it. We don't believe that any of these conditions were a result of our client's actions. And lastly, or two more, the circumstances are not purely financial in nature. Obviously, the purpose of any development is to make money. That's what developers are in the business of, no matter what they're constructing. But that's not the source of the special conditions that apply in this particular property. Again, this isn't a situation where we're absolutely maximizing units or building in the buffers. We are adding undisturbed land at over 3 acres of our site that we are giving up in order to contribute to and address the 4,000 square feet, which is, again, 33 times smaller than the area we are dedicating, in order to be able to encroach into that buffer. And by the way, the 33% time thing, it's less than 1/3 of 1%. As an example, if we were asking for a variance on a building that was 45 feet tall, it'd be a 1.6-inch variance. In the grand scheme of the size of the buffer on this entire site, that is the size and the scale of the variance that we are requesting. And lastly, is the variance granted is the minimum variance necessary to make possible the reasonable use of the land, buildings, and structures. I think that we've shown that. There is no other place to cross the property than where this is currently located. We worked with staff to slide the road over, to move it as much as we possibly could in order to shrink it to the absolute bare minimum, which staff mentioned in their staff report they believe that it is, and we believe that it is too. We are encroaching in less than 1/3 of 1%. We believe that what we are giving up in exchange for that, with over 3 acres of undisturbed property and green space, more than makes up for that. Essentially, the literal interpretation of this buffer as it currently exists kills this project. It renders more than half of the property completely unusable. It renders the extension of Preston Drive to the edge of this property somewhat pointless, except for accessing a very small portion to the northern part of the property. The hardships of my client have been discussed. We really have no other options here. In light of these hardships, we believe that the proposed mitigation that we have offered and worked with staff to come up with, we agree with staff that it is sufficient. Again, the purpose of this entire exercise is to avoid going into the wetlands. We do not want to impact the wetlands directly. We are specifically trying to skirt it, even though if we did go through the wetlands, this buffer wouldn't apply. We, again, support staff's recommendation for approval. We support the conditions from staff. I did want to mention one question that was mentioned in the pre-meeting by Ms. Jarrett. She asked a question about confirming that the road would not be underwater, trapping people in place. One, and I talked to our engineer about that after the meeting because I know you wanted that question answered. The engineers, again, used the county canal system models of the 100-year flood and 100-year storm to do the design for this project and believe that it adequately addresses stormwater. They met with the city on multiple occasions. They forwarded their findings over to the county to make sure that is the case. The road and the buildings are going to be 2 or 3 feet above what that level is. It's not in a floodplain. It is not in a flood zone. And again, per the engineers, because I'm not an engineer, the removal of some of the wetland buffer, which is some bushes and trees, is not going to have any impact on whether or not that road floods or doesn't flood, or whether or not we meet the stormwater requirements. We have to meet them. We are meeting them in the plans, and we obviously will get approval from both the county and the city in moving forward with the project. So all that said, I'm going to be quiet and take your questions.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions? I don't know if I have a question as much as I have a comment.
Yes,
I mean, you I hear what your engineer said, but it's pretty clear to me that what you have is a property that's in a hole. There's a railroad on one side and there's Chatham Parkway on the other side. I do have concerns about 192 apartments being accessed one way in and one way out. It's always a concern.
Sure.
I've given that as a concern in an area where there is no wetlands involved whatsoever,
Yeah.
and it's on high land. So that's just a comment.
I understand, and I live in a neighborhood that has probably 3 different roads that are only one way on, one out between me and getting off the island.
Understood.
We have multiple islands in this county that have one road on and one road off that all, unfortunately, in the coastal area that we are, going through wetlands or at least adjacent to wetlands like here is a necessity as far as accessing properties in order to build developments. There's good thing is there's a lot of experience in doing it. We hope that we're doing it right. We trust between the county engineers and the city engineers and our engineers that they'll get it right.
There's an awful lot of flooded roads in Chatham County.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Mr. Welch?
Mr. McCorkle, I see more than one way in and one way out. Am I correct?
Mr. Welch, will you cut on that microphone, please?
It's on.
Okay.
I
So-
see more than one way in and one way out. Am I
Yeah.
wrong in that? You
Yeah,
have the
so-
public access?
There is one public access. If you can see my screen, this is Preston Drive right here. This is the public access. If you've been down this road up here, I think there's a Dunkin' Donuts and a
That's
Taco
right.
Bell and some other things. There's a hotel right here. So this was all part of a planned overall project. This access back in the rear is not a public access. In order to have, there has to be emergency access from a multifamily development. And so the city required the developer and owner to acquire emergency access from an adjacent property owner. It's a property owner is not allowing public access. It's actually, it's through a parking lot, but it does provide access out to the road. There's going to be a gate there with a knock box like there often is in apartment complexes to provide emergency access. So in a situation where there is an emergency, it would be used there. It'll have to pass all the requirements of the fire trucks in order to get through there. And I did also want to mention on the analysis of the GDOT culvert that the county put in, it was also analyzed for the purposes of fire trucks and satisfies the requirements for those fire trucks as well.
And I will recall that rather than call this a hole, being built into the hole, Madam Chairman, Oglethorpe Mall must have been built in the hole too.
That's a
Because that was all
possibility.
wetland.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were in Savannah that time, but I remember dearly. And that was all freshwater wetland.
Yeah.
Okay? So that was successful.
Yeah, I would venture if you look at almost any major project that's been done in the county or in the city or in this region in the last 20 years, there have been freshwater wetlands either impacted directly or built immediately adjacent to. It's a fact of life around here. It's something that we try to be cognizant of. Again, we understand the need for wetlands. The reason for this variance is to avoid going in them.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry? Go ahead, Mr. Milder.
Mr. McCorkle, yeah, you may have covered this. Well, I want to ask to make sure that I understand this correctly. In the way that the petition is applied, you're trying to keep all of development within the city's stated buffer and not encroach on the wetland, correct? On the
Correct.
state designated.
Correct. We would have to
Wetland.
encroach in 4,000 square feet of the city's buffer, but there is no encroachment in the actual wetlands.
Had the development had plans to develop through the state or federal delineated wetland, you would have sought a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers to do so, and had you have received that permit, the city buffer would be null and void, and no variance would be required if you received that permit from the Army Corps of Engineers, correct?
Correct.
So in this case, what you're trying to do is avoid encroaching on the actual wetland while keeping all of the development off of it, and then, but you need this variance for the
Correct.
city buffer.
If we built the road through the wetlands, the city, then we wouldn't be here asking for a variance because the city buffer wouldn't apply, but we
Right.
don't want to do that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we understood that.
Thank you.
But we might have 2 ways in and 2 ways out at that point?
I find it hard to imagine there's ever going to be full public access through the back of that project and through the shopping center, unfortunately.
Just an argument.
Understood.
Any other discussion?
Thank
All
you.
right, I'm open for a motion.
Cole's motion to approve staff's recommendation with the 4 conditions.
Jeff Ventrica, second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Ms. Amick?
Yes.
Ms. Bowles?
Yes.
Mr. Coles?
Yes.
Mr. Kegler?
Yes.
Mr. Milder?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Notrika?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Welsh?
Yes.
Mr. Wywoody?
Yes.
I too say yes reluctantly. Motion passes. All right, our next item is Flume Amendment for 1950 Benton Boulevard and 76 Highlands Boulevard. Future Land Use Map Amendment.
That's correct, Madam Chair. Members of the Commission, my name is Brad Clement, Staff of Development Services here at the MPC. As you mentioned, this application came in 2 parts. It requires a future land use map amendment in addition to the proposed master plan amendment on the tail end of this. You'll have to vote on the first item to hear the second item. So that's why there's 2 applications. When this was advertised and signed, the notifications went out simultaneously. Eventually, we'll get to a part perhaps where we're talking about a DRI. And so some of the concerns that you'll hear about from that DRI are tied to the inconsistency with the future land use map that we are proposing to change with the first application. So just to give you all of that. So the petitioner requests an amendment to the future land use map for the commercial, suburban, residential, general, and planned development. That's what's indicated here. You'll see the red area on the tracks in question. The tracks are located on the north side of Jimmy DeLoach, adjacent to the I-95 Jimmy DeLoach interchange. The Alpha tract is straddled by Benton Boulevard and Highlands Boulevard. The C-17 track over here is to the east of Highlands Boulevard. Also important to this, and again, I'm going to try not to repeat information on similar slides, though it relates to the same tracks. You'll see on this slide there are 3 colors, orange, yellow, and blue, and those relate to the various jurisdictions. So this is the Savannah part, the yellow. To the east is Port Wentworth. To the west, down here, the blue is City of Pooler. Again, when we get to the portion about the DRI, these would be jurisdictions adjacent that were notified as part of that process. And reviewing things for a future land use map, you try to look to the comprehensive plan to find where this matches up and if this is in accordance with that plan. And again, this gets to the specific language that in the findings of the DRI. Because this area is currently zoned PD PUD and had previously been zoned PUD C, and as far back as 1999 with the adoption of the Godley Station Master Plan, this site has been for more than 25 years under the master plan that governs Godley Station. So what we see, and we tie here to the suburban retrofit in the Plan 2040, which would accommodate reuse and retrofit as it would imply to an area that has been under development but now may need to address some other things. So this is the master plan as it exists. You're familiar with Godley Station and its size and scope. These are the tracks per the master plan, and you'll see this again of current use as governed by the existing master plan. It's commercial retail use. Staff recommends approval of the request to amend the flume from a designation of commercial, suburban, and residential general to planned development, which again aligns the previous and current zoning with future land use map. Pending your questions.
All right, is the applicant here?
Yes.
Just a very quick housekeeping matter. The staff report identifies me as being the petitioner. I'm in fact not the petitioner. And I only bring this up because I have been before you on 2 previous occasions where I was the petitioner. On both occasions, we were seeking a master plan amendment to make both tracks industrial, both the Alpha track, which is 120 acres, and C-17, which is roughly 100, 105 acres. We were looking at that time to make both tracks industrial. What's before you today is a very, very different petition, and I can't even begin to tell you how many meetings we've had with MPC staff to get this petition into the current form that it's in. It's at MPC's insistence that we are including these two tracks together so that every one of you will see that C-17 will never be industrial. It's specifically being designed for commercial on Highland with all forms of residential behind it. And on Alpha, we'll specifically have commercial against the major arteries, but in the middle will be industrial because it will be the back of a retail center. Rather than putting residential there, the only industrial is the back of the residential that faces out. So with that, if I can allot my 19 minutes to Mr. Jepson, I'll sit down, or if it's Robert McCorkle time, I'll give him my 45 minutes, whichever you prefer. But I think we can do it in 19.
Already.
That's why I said it. We can do this in 19 minutes. Thank you.
Can we pull up that master plan? Good afternoon. I'm Jeff Jepson with Evans General Contractors and agent for Safavia. Good. Brad, can I pull up that master plan? So this property has a long history of work. We actually formed what we called at the time the Effingham Parkway Stakeholders Group over 5 years ago, and we've had 10+ meetings. Those meetings have included the city council, members of MPC, and over 10+ meetings with the neighborhood association. We have worked and changed and modified and tweaked and compromised to the point where we actually have really a consensus. We have staff recommendations for approval here. We have a plan that the developer can live with, and then we have 2 letters of support actually that we've received from the neighborhood association. I want to just first off say we recognize that letters of support from a neighborhood association do not reflect the views wholly of all of the neighbors. There's a lot of frustration in that neighborhood. There has been that, and I've learned that because I've been at all of these meetings and I have met with all of these folks, and they do have some real concerns. And this area is challenged. It's challenged in that we have the Effingham Parkway. Brad, I'm going to flip through this. Can you pull the one up, our one master plan that we submitted that shows the warehouses?
Sally, is that on the desktop?
I thought that was part of your presentation.
Right here.
No, the one that shows the warehouses and the residential.
The concept plan.
Yeah.
You want your current one? Or?
Yes. Yeah. It's further down. Right.
This one? Okay.
That one.
Unhide. Let's unhide these. Can you see it quickly? Don't see it. Never mind. This one. Does that work?
I think he's looking
Oh,
for it.
let me keep going while they're going, just so I won't run too long. So we were challenged by the fact that we have Effingham Parkway, which has long been part of the regional transportation plan for the Metropolitan Planning Commission to allow trucks and traffic and vehicles to help relieve congestion on 21. That's been on this MPC, this Planning Commission's plan for the last 25 years. So that is a known entity. It's finally being built. It's finally being connected. Effingham is actually finally building their particular portion, so that is starting to become real. There's a truck moratorium right now with the city of Savannah along Benton Boulevard and Highlands Boulevard. That moratorium is in discussions with DOT, who may or may not be funding portions of that Effingham particular parkway. And so there are things that are well outside the developer's control that the city and the county and GDOT and the neighborhood associations have to work through. And so that's one item. You also have infrastructure challenges. Those roads were put in probably 20-plus years ago. Lots and lots of development has occurred, and the roads and the traffic is extremely challenging. It's too narrow. Everyone acknowledges and realizes that the levels of services associated with those intersections up there do not meet current city standards or goals or county standards. And we know that because we've actually done 2 traffic studies as part of this process. One pre-COVID. It was actually kind of right during COVID. We recognized the flaw in that traffic might be a little bit lower during COVID period, so then we updated that post-COVID to make sure that we had accurate data, and then we used Thomas & Hutton engineers to redesign interchanges going from a 2-lane road to a road that supports this particular development. In here, the first 900 to 1,000 feet of Highlands, where we actually are going from 1 left turn lane to 2 dedicated left turn lanes and a right turn lane as well. So we've spent a lot of time on traffic and want to be part of the solution, to this particular project. And then we get to developer-controlled issues. We sat and listened and talked to the residents up there, and the owner of this property owns a property called Safavia. He wants to put a regional headquarters here. He's a big internet distributor for rugs and homewares. He operates warehouses over 3 million square feet in market already. So he is a neighbor. He owns properties. He actually owns this particular property here, and he intends to occupy these warehouses here. So these are not speculative warehouses. Hey, does the port need more warehouses? Some of the questions related to that market. This is for his actual use. He intends to be the particular tenant there. But what that does, it gives us insight as to who the user is, the traffic counts and the trip counts and stuff that comes to and from his facility. Not all warehouses are the same, and not all trucking is the same. Trucking and traffic counts from the port in and out of those gates is extensive. Traffic count in and out of industrial facilities, as demonstrated by these traffic studies, is only about 30% of actually what residential or commercial traffic is. So the lowest impact traffic development that can be placed here is actually light industrial, and this is also on the lower side of the scale. It is not a narrow transload facility, which has lots of trucks coming in and lots of trucks coming out, because in this instance, we actually know who the end user is. With respect to traffic, there were a number of concerns, a number of things that the residents were very interested in. One, they felt like their community had been underserved by grocery stores for a very long time. So the developer actually owns all of this property here. He's agreed and actually set aside this parcel.
Excuse me, your pointer is not showing up.
Oh, it's not?
Mm-mm.
If you can, I guess you can't point.
You can point.
Anything y'all can do to help him out?
So the property in pink that's adjacent on the left side of your screen, that's adjacent to Highlands Boulevard. Yeah, I just need to go back to the previous slide.
Thank God for women.
I need the different slide. We just switched slides on me. There we go. All right, can you still see?
Yes, I can see
Okay,
it.
I'm sorry about that, ma'am.
That's okay.
Madam Chairman. So this parcel right here, we actually did a development plan, got a grocery store footprint, put in the right amount of parking and truck access and circulation to make sure that that parcel was sufficient for a particular grocery store. We've actually had it under contract with Kroger. However, there were still some unknown in terms of the region and development, some traffic challenges that have yet to be kind of worked through that gave them a little bit of pause. But we think resolution to many of these issues will actually help get them excited back in this particular parcel. If not, other grocers will. One of the other important things is that you'll see that there's no truck access out to Benton Boulevard at all. That was very important. There is a school on Benton Boulevard, and so that was a unanimous agreement on that. There was no need to put trucks through to that commercial parcel or to Benton Boulevard, which is the most heavily trafficked of the roads, and put trucks by that particular school. We've agreed basically to limit the traffic here. All the ingress to this comes from Jimmy DeLoach. So you have, and that gives us tons of stacking on here for additional roads for these two particular warehouses, so we don't have a backup of trucks. We have lots and lots of traffic and stacking there. So to get into here, you come in off of Jimmy DeLoach, either make a left turn or a right turn movement. If you are going distribution outbound and you're going to 16, you actually make a right turning movement outside here. There is a portion for trucks that do return to the port that will need to come out onto Highlands Boulevard, and that is why we spent time investing in the traffic study and adding the additional lanes and putting in the traffic and trip generations that are associated with these warehouses, as well as the commercial part in here. This section, this will have to go back to the City of Savannah, obviously for approval, and the City of Savannah, when they get to site plan approvals, we envision entering into a development agreement with the city where the developer is offering to pay for all of these particular improvements and these road improvements here, as well as coordinate and cooperate with the city. There's a park here that's been dedicated to the city for an extended period of time behind the property, and there's a road that goes in behind. All of this is subject to coordination with the city, subject to a development agreement. And what this road will do is it'll allow this particular piece of property that was previously proposed as industrial to be commercial and residential. Yes, it is very true that these residents wanted more commercial, and they are getting more commercial. They're actually getting about 56 acres that are set aside for commercial. For perspective, 12 Oaks Shopping Center with that Publix grocery store is on 10.8 acres. They're setting aside 56 acres for commercial real estate, and they're setting aside all of that in an area that provides spectacular buffers for the neighborhood. If you look at the industrial buffers with the city, they're only 40 to 100 feet. We're setting aside 200 and 300 feet to allow commercial development here on Highlands Boulevard. The landowner owns both sides of these, so he's dedicating and donating that additional right-of-way that's needed to accomplish that. And then we have residential behind that particular commercial. And so this is property over here is referred to as C17. That's part of this application so that the residents have surety that nobody's going to go back and then change this or try to get that zoned industrial in the particular future. We presented multiple plans. We presented that as an option because it does have lower truck counts to do the industrial, and they said, no, we want this one, not that one. So we changed to that particular one. So with that, I'll answer any questions and leave you with the fact that this has been a long process. We committed to work and work and work. You should have, we have a letter that was received on the 14th of November from the HNA. That did have a number of conditions. We've gone back and forth and collaborated and explained why we can do certain things, why we can't agree to other things just because they're out of our control. They might be related to the city. And then we also received an additional letter of support this morning. Most of the MPC staff was included on that, and they told me that you guys have access to that. So we stand before you with not 100% support from all residents. I promise you we do not have that. But we spent a lot of time addressing and implementing and coordinating and addressing their concerns. But we do have, for the members of the HNA that have invested a lot of time as elected officials to sit down and be good, honest brokers with us and really understand why this works and why that doesn't work. Those folks spent a lot of time and frankly took a lot of heat when they stood up and said, you know what, this is a reasonable plan for what we need to get, and we're getting the things that we need out of this. There are a lot of discussions that still need to happen between the city, certainly and the residents related to infrastructure, and there's a lot of unknowns related to Effingham Parkway, but at least everybody's talking, towards a positive resolution and a common vision master plan for that particular area. Subject to any questions.
All right, questions? Go ahead, Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Jepson, on the Highlands Boulevard access, is that intended to be signalized?
Yes, sir. It's signalized already.
Okay.
It will have to be completely reworked because it's going from a 2-lane road to a dedicated, it'll actually be 5 lanes. You'll have a dedicated free-running right turn lane as you head westbound that will allow you to turn up. You'll have 3 dedicated, or 2 dedicated left turn lanes, a straight lane, and then a right turn lane as well. So it's a significant expansion.
So that's, the signal is at Highland and Jimmy DeLoach, or the signal is between the commercial and Highland?
So right now, the existing signal is on Jimmy DeLoach and Highlands, and there will be a new one that's installed for the new road configuration there. And then we don't know whether additional signals would be required up in here. There likely will be, probably in this location, right up in here, once somebody comes in and develops all of that and has actual plan and traffic counts and number of units and that sort of thing. But we expect that there likely would be another one here, which would serve as a traffic calming element and allow people to get to and from the commercial and the grocery on the other side.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Along that exact intersection, and I know this isn't germane to the future land use map, but I would recommend you guys do an elevated pedestrian bridge across that, considering you've got this proposed trail that goes to both a supermarket and a school, and all this residential in the top, northeast corner. It seems to me it would be a much safer way for people to travel what will become, and already is, a very highly traveled road.
Either that or signalized.
Yeah, we don't disagree with that at all. That's probably a very good idea.
Mr. Jepson, so I want to make sure I'm reading this correctly. The C-17 is going to be approximately 720 residential units?
This is a concept plan. Honestly, the property owner is an industrial developer and runs his own business. Because this is no longer going to be industrial, he's going to now sell this land to a developer that will develop their own master plan and units. He's not going to actually develop this parcel. This is a concept plan that Thomas and Hutton put together as a density study to basically say, hey, if we did residential and commercial, we'll put commercial on the front to provide the buffers with the residential in back, but there's no certainty with the exact unit number or counts that you guys might approve in the future. I don't know if someone is going to come in and ask for 18 units to the acre or 12 units to the acre for the multifamily. I don't know if there's going to be a requirement to have some single family, attached or detached. That'll be something for another developer to work through with you guys and get approval.
So our process then, let's just say, I'm looking at 720 thinking it's a lot, but somebody comes in and they want to do 1,500.
Mm-hmm.
What happens then?
Madam Commissioner, we've kind of not only put my slides out of order, but we've delved into the master plan amendment part of this. So I would caution you to not we're going to talk about those details next. This is, the future land use was just the step 1A, if you will. And so the things that Mr. Jepson was talking about will be more appropriately discussed in the next application pending the outcome of this.
So, one other thing, if I may, just so that you know, one of the reasons that we tied this request to the DRI is because it already had some residential. So if they go like a whole lot over, then they'll have to go back through that process. So it'll be another set of eyes looking at it if that helps give you additional information to respond to your question.
Somebody else?
Yes, I have some questions and comments. And Brad, I don't know if this is the appropriate time to talk about the concerns about changing the flume from commercial to light industrial. Is this the appropriate time to ask questions and comments about that?
What you're referring to, Madam Commissioner, is the designated use within the master plan, which is the amendment next. All of this, per the flume, will be redesignated planned development. And that's with the suburban retrofit that we talked about to get us to incorporating these mixed uses and the other things. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Yes, I think so.
If not, we'll have plenty
I have
of
a question related to that. Can you?
I'm sorry, if I could. This plan development designation is necessary to point to the fact that a master plan is required to determine what can go here. So this is literally just to say there's another document to which you need to refer in order to find out what's appropriate. In the standard zoning ordinance, it has a series of zoning districts that are permitted within each designation. And so it will tell you, oh, because this is residential general, this can be RMF, 1, 2, 3, whatever the case may be. Because we're trying to set this up so that there can be kind of this flexible, yet to be discovered future of what exactly can go here within limitation, we need this to be designated PD to point us to the future master plans. If that
And
helps.
the difference between the PD zoning that you're asking us to do and the PUD zoning that already exists is?
So that's a great question. Under the original zoning ordinance, it had what I like to refer to as these built-in PUDs. So PUD C was one that contained 4 categories. Within a PUD C, you would have residential use, commercial use, industrial use, or institutional uses. So within that, you would basically just designate, okay, I'm going to do this use, and it could be any of those things. Actually, I would liken what we're attempting to do to something very similar, right? We're saying we want to envelop the future proposal within a plan development framework, but within it, we're going to throw in BN, BL, IL, in those specific tie-ins to the current NUZO districts, only because it's such a large tract. We want to give it that flexibility to say, we actually want master planning so that we don't have a Sears tract, the thing that we did earlier. We want to give them a little bit of flexibility to say, okay, this is the framework we've set up. Future developer, you can now come in and develop according to this within these guardrails.
I have to say that recently I've gotten a bad taste in my mouth for plan developments.
They're not as bad as you think.
Okay. Mr. Yellen, did you?
I just wanted to give a very quick answer to that question. The Godly PD is a very old PD.
I know.
It tends to tell you what uses you can have based on the color of the map, but it doesn't tell you anything about development standards. So I share with you that I don't like the Godly PD because we stand before you without any sense of what we're supposed to do. Originally, when I met with MPC staff, I wanted to create a new PD, like Eastern Wharf has its own PD or Hopeton Landing has its own PD. They discouraged me and said, let's tie it to NUZO. So what we've done is we've created a PD for this site that specifically ties in to exact provisions of NUZO. And so I'm becoming a believer. I was prepared to do my own PD, but I think staff's suggestion to make this into a PD that ties into NUZO corrects the existing Godly PD because it offers development standards, which we don't have right now.
Okay. Anything else? We do have speaker cards. I'm not sure if you want to speak on the future land use map or if you want to speak on the development plan itself. I'll give you an opportunity to do both if you put both on here. Jason Chambliss, I'm not sure if you wanted to speak or if...
We're the agents of the...
Okay. Ryan Thompson? George Kendall? Okay. And John Patrick?
I appreciate you guys having this meeting late enough in the afternoon that I could come to it. I've lived at the Emerald Cove.
Oh, yes, your name for the record, please.
John Patrick, sorry. I've lived at the Emerald Cove for, this will be my 6th year. And this area is my recreation area. There's 2 ponds back there that I go fishing on. There's long trails. I'm not the only one I know. There's another guy. We both go back there and fishing. I see families back there playing, and I think this could be a big change. I think, I'm not sure, but I think the lake that I go fishing on, it may not disappear. I think that must be up here. But, so I'm not happy with what they're doing, but just wanted to state that for your record.
Understand, I appreciate your frustration.
But
I
there are
also have...
other people that go back there and have fun, but maybe a good thing about this would be that you'd have somebody there taking care of that property, and it wouldn't be such a mess. And because
Right.
people are so sloppy back there and throw stuff everywhere. But thank you.
Thank you. I have Brian Haven, I'm sorry. Blake. Okay.
I am a resident in the Highlands community. I speak on behalf of myself as well as a group of people that are too busy at work to speak on this topic. I know you guys are looking at this concept plan from review. Maybe you haven't been out to this area, but if you have, this is a highly developed area. It is growing constantly. This section that they're talking about is on the main intersection, actually two main intersections of Benton Boulevard and Geneva Loge, as well as I-95 and Geneva Loge. I would consider this plot of land the diamond of Geneva Loge. And I think if we stick warehouses in this section, it's going to prevent the city from growing farther as a good. Fuller Parkway is already reaching its full expansion. As you guys can see, I think Geneva Loge is going to be the next section. I just think it's a really bad idea to get a few warehouses inside that piece of property on this railway. And that's just all I want to speak up and let you guys know about.
Well, thank you for your comments. Any questions from y'all about? Okay.
Madam Chair, I would like,
This would be for the
Community.
person who spoke. All right, we're going to give the applicant an opportunity to rebut, and then you can make a statement.
First, I was not aware that people were using the property for recreation. There is a very nice lake, actually, that kind of fronts up, that is not on our particular property, and so hopefully that still, remains. There is a public park in here and land set aside for a public park in land that is actually owned by the city. And so I know there's part of those discussions is that park, where's that park? I'm not sure what that red line is. The park is back in here, and then there's a road that kind of connects Highlands and Benton Boulevard. Our goal all along has been to be a partner and part of the solution here. I do recognize it is change, but we do have a plan that reflects the desires of many of the residents up there. Admittedly, not all. We're providing a good community benefit in terms of our contribution to solve community problems that exist in terms of traffic. And those are not unthoughtful. They're studied and designed with particular engineers. I get the sensitivity to warehouses, but we have a really good plan here with respect to traffic and how that works. And we're setting aside, enough property, to do a tremendous amount of commercial. I mean, and we actually have an exhibit that shows just within Alpha Tract, you can fit the Savannah Mall, Oglethorpe Mall, and Abercorn Walk all in this one particular piece of property. So 56 acres is an enormous amount. And so we've also committed to, kind of forming a board and allowing the HOA, basically us, participate in that and let them collaborate and coordinate. Now, they wouldn't have approval on what uses necessarily go in, but they can certainly have input and influence, and we're committed to that as well.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Can I ask?
You're one of the applicants, aren't you?
No, ma'am.
Okay. I thought that you had said that Mr. Patrick?
Mr. Kin,
He did have a speaker card.
you got a speaker card on?
Oh, Mr. Kendall?
Yeah,
Sure.
thank you. I'm in the apartments,
State your name for the record, please.
George Kindle. I'm in the apartments right behind. There is no park. So, the park is actually a small park that opened up last spring, I think. But it is on the other side by the Emerald Complex. And it's a park that essentially has a walking area, but they don't have anything else. And your area here is filled with families, filled with children and parents. And there isn't any place for them to play. The closest park to folks in the area here in Pooler, they would have to drive down to the area right behind the City Hall area. There is no park here. There is no place for any of the kids, and I see them playing in areas that they shouldn't be. And I'm concerned, I'm extremely happy that you might have a Kroger or something there, but I don't see any concern being shown for the folks, or the families, I should say, in the...
Got about 30 seconds left.
Sure, in the apartment complexes. So that's the only concern I have, okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So the area that you see here in green is actually deeded and owned by the city, by the original developer, and it is set aside as a park. He is correct in that it is not a developed park at this particular time. There's no swing sets, walking trails, or anything else, but it is property that's designated for a park that the city of Savannah owns, and the neighborhood association is starting discussions about what that can be.
All right, thank you. All right, any other questions? I'll entertain a motion.
Cole's motion to approve staff's recommendation.
Why would he second?
All right, I have a motion and a second. Ms. Amick? This is for the
I know.
future land use map.
So if we hear the next and we disapprove, what does it do to this vote?
It doesn't do anything to this one. The future land use map would change, but that doesn't obligate us to approve the next.
Okay, yes.
Ms. Bowles?
Yes.
Mr. Coles?
Yes.
Mr. Kegler?
Yes.
Mr. Melder?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
No.
Mr. Nochika?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Welsh?
Yes.
Mr. Woody?
Yes.
I too say yes. Motion passes. All right, and our last agenda item is map amendment for Godley Station PD.
Madam Chair, members of the commission, Brad Clement again. This is part 1B of the future land use that we just heard. This is going to get into some of the details that we were alluding to, but this is the appropriate time to talk about those things in the one eaches. You've seen this slide before. We're talking about the same tracks, in the same location. Per the master plan as it currently exists, you've seen this before. The orange, the commercial retail, and we've talked about the massive area that is designated for that purpose. Per the original master plan, these commercial uses under the Godley Station plan, they're indicated here. And so as we talk about this in detail, we're going to talk about two things: appropriate or permitted uses and development standards associated with that, and that's where you get use separation, buffers, whether it has the ability to be there in a certain density or intensity. Those are development standards tied to uses. So what you see on this slide is per the Godley Station master plan, this orange area here, the tracks that we're talking about, these are the commercial designations that were there. We have also talked about the the desire of the neighborhood to want commercial, and they have all this commercial, so why can't it be? And this gets exactly to the scale of that commercial development. They're not looking for a mall. They're looking for small neighborhood commercial development to support them where they live. That's also something that the master plan, as proposed, intends to do. And so you'll see here the development standards. All right, so this is the master plan as submitted, as proposed by this application. This is different than the artifact that went forward with the DRI. They exist for two different purposes, and so that's why they look different. The DRI is a development proposal, which triggers a notification process, so other jurisdictions are alerted that this is happening, and then there's weigh-in. That's also tied to the flume that we just changed to reconcile where those things don't match. That document then turns to this, and you're familiar with looking at these documents. These are what master planning documents look like. You'll see, instead of orange, we have brown and light brown and green for park, and to those are tied these development standards. What we have, and what has been alluded to, and sort of stole my thunder, we have designated commercial. We've talked about the targeted grocery store use over here adjacent to Benton. This middle portion here, the IL, particularly for the warehouse use proposal with the indicated curb cut on Ogeechee, and that's a GDOT thing and continued negotiations. 3 parcels here that are also designated for commercial. There will be no residential uses on what was previously the Alpha tract. And the petitioner is correct. It was through the conversations with the neighborhood, the staff, and the city that this was pushed together so that this all moves as a single development pod, and we can nail down the standards so there can be no future bait and switch. We're trying to work that out now. That's why everybody's trying to be very careful about what they're saying and how they say it. So the development standards, as indicated, actually on the C-17 tract, which is the eastern tract adjacent to Fort Wentworth, has mixed uses of a commercial nature. They include business commercial, which is also present on the Alpha tract. They have business neighborhood business, and they have limited business. And what that accounts for is different densities of different residential uses to be mixed with those commercial things, which helps to scale the type of commercial development that will occur on that tract. Because it follows the NUZO standards with regard to development standards, there are use separations tied to those uses. So what you're seeing here is where these things will go. What you will see in the future as a general development plan comes back is precisely one each is where these are going to go and what their adjacencies are, what the buffers look like. This is the tail of step 1A to step 1B so that work can continue. This was, and you've heard referenced, and there was some concern about the warehouse use. This was the initial plan. You'll notice it looks significantly different than what has been proposed and carried forward. So a lot of the comments that were submitted reference what they last saw, which looked like this. Since then, and with the meetings of the Highlands Neighborhood Association, this particular proposal has been given an endorsement. To dive in again to the use thing, and this only applies to the C-17 tract, right? There's no residential tied to the Alpha tract, or what was formerly the Alpha tract. The BC is the most intense commercial use. The BN is a scaled neighborhood business that you're familiar with. You don't see limited business very much because of the residential business separation and development standards, and it's important to point that out here. And then the light industrial, which accommodates the warehouses. I think there shouldn't be any questions about where that goes and what that is. And the mixing of these uses and the development standards, the intent is that the most restrictive development standard would be applied where those uses are mixed. That applies to the limited business. So again, when the general development plans and specific site plans come back, it has to accommodate, and there are You see these conditions here? These are accommodations to the development standards, particularly to BL, because again, it's the most restricted development standard of the 4 being proposed, that goes to ground floor square footage and building height. And so when we talk about mixing horizontal and vertical uses to get upper story residential, because of the very restrictive nature of that, that has to be relaxed. But again, when it comes back in a more refined plan, we will have to make a determination, you will have to make a determination whether it's appropriate at that time. What we tried not to do with this is to make it so rigid and inflexible that no meaningful development could occur based on standards. And you've seen many times master plans have come back where they're just trying to change the color on a map, add a specific use to a color that was already there. We're having learned doing this so many times that we think that this is a better mix to at least allow something to go forward and put pen to paper and then be re-reviewed at the appropriate time. As part of both the DRI and the MPC staff review procedures, while this is a master plan amendment, what we used is the General Development Master Plan Review process. This looks and feels more like a rezoning than a master plan development because it is such of a magnitude and different from where we started that this is the most appropriate way to go. So this would be, and if you'll see, this is an amendment to the master plan which would go from this board based on your recommendation to City Council, and they will make a determination. And if that is done, the city will adopt the plan as approved. It will be tied to the ordinance, and then we will wait for future plans to come back, and we will review those as they come in. You'll see the general development master plans, those items indicated in red here have not been met by the artifact provided because it doesn't have the specificity to get there. The subsequent plan submittals we expect to see, there will be no red there, though that's a requirement of the general development plan. It has to be met. So with that, MPC staff recommends approval, but with some conditions. And I'm going to put my long-distance seeing glasses on because I'm going to read them to you. It's ironic that we just talked about apartments. Condition number 1, the United States Corps of Engineers jurisdictional determination will be reviewed and required as it applies to all subsequent general and specific development plan submittals. The City of Savannah zoning ordinance shall apply as determined by Chapter 3, Article 10, Natural Resources Standards. So those buffers that you heard get zeroed out. This specifically indicates that that's not going to happen just by falling through the cracks of a PUD. Condition 2, the applicable development standards for any identified use shall apply without modification. In other words, the zoning development standards and use as written are what governs this. There's nothing made up with the exception of the 2 accommodations for square footage and building height as it relates specifically to BL. So any future variances or deviations from what is written in the ordinance as it exists will be submitted as a general development plan with variances, or it will go to ZBA as appropriate for a single development issue tied to a specific development of a specific property tied to a larger general development plan. Parcel A, which is this guy, along Benton, the one that's been talked about, reference grocery store. Specifically, a general development plan will be reviewed for that before anything happens there. And again, that is to provide insurance that the grocery store use will happen. If the parcel starts to be subdivided out and filling up with smaller scale commercial, and then there's no room left at the end for the large scale grocery store, we feel like we have not met the intent, which is why that condition is there. The condition 4 has to do with the anticipated residential yields, and it ties to both the DRI.
Can you put the conditions back up, please?
I'm sorry. There we go.
Thank you.
Sorry. This has to do with establishing ceilings and floors where we're essentially, and Ed, if you wouldn't mind, we're forcing this to mixed use. you will have a floor of residential dedicated for this tract. So, you know, the numbers and counts, because of the density, are tied to area. We don't have a specific site plan. We don't know, particularly with regard to C-17, because of the wetlands, how much upland is actually going to be there until we receive that jurisdictional determination. So the traffic impact studies, though one has been provided with a notional number at the time more closely tied to use than actual numbers, we will expect to see that refined as this moves forward. So that's the purpose of that condition. The other and final condition is per case 24-005036ZA, was a master plan amendment for the Mulberry at Godley, where it was determined we have touched this master plan enough times that it can no longer be considered a minor amendment. Before any site plans will be reviewed, specific site plans or specific general development plans, the master plan for Godley has to be amended to reflect the approved changes of this commission and the city council. Before, in the case of the Mulberry Highlands Business Park, you're very much used to things moving forward as a pod of development, where there's standards tied to this. This is outside of what was originally in Godley Station. We're applying it to this, and now we're saying, if you're going to do this, you have to wrap this back into the Godley thing, so as you reference that master plan, these standards stick with it. So pending your questions.
All right, and the applicant?
Jeff Jepson again, for the agent for Safavia. So this portion is actually a result of the certainty that the homeowners association wanted. They reached out to MPC and said, hey, how do we document this? How do we appropriately go through the process so that nobody retrades or switches up later and nobody tries to rezone something? So this is MPC's suggested path. It met the goals and the standards for the association, and the developer does not object to the plan that they've agreed to.
All right, thank you. Questions?
I'll go now.
Okay.
So I have some questions and concerns. So what's north of the warehousing is all single-family residents, is that correct?
Directly north is a road right-of-way and a city park. And then
Can you go to the
Yeah.
map, please?
That one was good.
That was good.
Nope.
Right
Good.
there.
Okay.
Right there where the words say
It's hidden,
proposed
so
pedestrian path connecting residential to school. Right there, that's single-family residence, or a little bit up, right there.
that's multifamily.
Multifamily, okay.
That's right. This is a park.
Uh-huh.
This is a buffer, and then these industrial properties are in accordance with the city of Savannah setbacks
Okay.
from their own property line, and then you get to a right-of-way, then you get to a park.
Right, okay. So, and for warehousing or any type of light industrial uses, those uses are more intensive than commercial uses, is that correct?
Not with respect to traffic, no. So-
With hours of operation, because from the definitions in the code, they're separated, and I believe the definition says, light industrial is separated out from commercial because it is a more intensive use.
You're aware? Are you referencing this slide, not commission?
No, it's in the city code, another,
These are from the news articles.
okay.
So I'm not sure, I'm not an expert on the ordinance or a warehouse operator, but any and all, the intent was to design this without the warehouse or the light industrial section, without request for any variances related to hours of operation, related to setbacks or any other thing that they may have. They'll comply and will not be requesting any variances.
And hours of operation for light industrial is 24/7, right?
I don't know.
Melanie?
What I do know is 4 hours of operation. For warehouses, there are sound ordinances which allow you to conduct certain activities, but certain decibels, certain levels of noise can't cross your property, as well as light pollution. You can only have a certain amount of lighting in certain areas, and that can't get crossed at a property line. And that is a regular practice that when we do build warehouses, that we'll do sound studies and we'll do light studies to verify that we meet and comply with those ordinances.
Well, in a light industrial facility, you'll have commercial trucks that load, unload, and back up, and you most certainly can hear the beeping, even if it's, 200 feet away. I mean, and it does, and I believe, Melanie, correct me if I'm wrong, that light industrial can operate 24/7.
Yeah, it depends on who the user is, but what I was going to also say is that as part of the design review process, what we can do and what we try to do for industrial uses that are kind of on that edge of being sort of close to residential uses, to have the loading and unloading away from it. So the building, in addition to the buffer that's in place, acts as an additional buffer to help with the noise. But those are things that we look at when they go through the design review process, and those are things that would be considered from looking at that. And I think that, other than that, there's no way to guarantee because we don't know who the final user is going to be.
So one of those buildings, and this is not a site-specific site plan, but one of those buildings, actually the end cap of the building where there are no truck doors, backs up to that particular area, and that's the one that's actually closest. Can you pull that one back up? That's the one that's actually closest to the existing residential. The one that backs up to the park, which requires more of a buffer, oftentimes, that's kind of a collaboration on what people want to see. Sometimes we put a berm, sometimes we put a fence, sometimes we put a sound wall. Depends upon, people's preferences. But in here, we would certainly meet the sound and the buffer requirements. And then in addition to that, we have a right-of-way, and then you also have another park. I don't know what that is, honestly, right there. But this is an example of this building here. Truck courts are on the side of the building, so noise would be generated this way and that way, and we don't have truck traffic backing up with backup beepers in and around the residential, that multifamily.
It's still really, really close to residential, and from personal experience, I know that will be, the noise will be a problem. The second thing that I want to ask is, if we rezone this parcel, and I know there was on one of the slides that it said, that the use will be warehousing for this particular petitioner, but when we rezone this parcel to light industrial, they can change their mind as to what or is that going to be specifically tied to this?
I apologize if I was confusing with my language.
Okay.
It was zoned PD when we started. It will be zoned PD when we're done, regardless of your decision. What we are doing is tying that light industrial use to a master plan document that indicates it will be here and it will be for that purpose. It also goes on to further exclude industrial uses from expanding onto the C-17 tract.
I see. But in this area, if they didn't want to use it for warehousing, could anything for light industrial by right be put in there?
She's right.
Yeah.
By right, so it could be a truck stop, a distillery, a freight yard, a recycling facility, anything?
They would have to come back with a general development plan, and we'd have to look at that again.
Okay. Thank you.
Could we arbitrarily say, we don't want that, even though it's zoned for that? Yes.
If I may, I think that if there are some uses that you think could be burdensome to the people in the community, it's up to the developer to say he wants to do 2 or 3 things. He can always edit himself out if he decides he wants to do that, but he doesn't have to. But that's up to the applicant. I think that he's going to best know who his client is and who his user is. We have no idea. When we do our reviews, we look at it for all the uses that are allowed in the industrial, the light industrial district.
But we can condition uses, can't we?
Well, you can ask the developer if he would be willing to limit some of the uses. For example, if you don't want I don't know, I'll throw out something arbitrarily. Let's say you don't want a distillery. You could ask him if he would just stick with not have that as a use, but he could do everything else. So it's up to him to decide whether he wants to limit himself or not.
So we're setting up this process so that this is kind of a mother may I situation. If we want to do something, this is set up now so that we're coming back to you and getting your approval. And if we want to do something, you're going to get another, bite at the apple on buffers and sound and sight and use and all of that stuff. So what we're asking for today is not control. We're leaving control with you guys. So if something, if they want to change, they're going to have to come back to you. I can tell you, this particular owner has been my client for over 10 years. This is his core business. He's in the warehouse and industrial and import business. It's been in his family for 100+ years. They sell goods all over the place. This is one of his priorities. And I would be stunned, but I can't speak. I don't know him, and I can't speak for his business, but I can tell you, based on the track record and the history, this is a definite need that he has for his business.
If I may, so you'll recall I mentioned that the plan is almost self-policing because of the development standards adopted, which speak to use separation. So things that would otherwise be allowed to be in light industrial, they're increasing the separation. And so it's always a game to maximize the real estate, but particularly on the C-17 track. The layout and configuration of what ultimately moves forward, just like with the light industrial, if they wanted to come and put the most egregious thing in light industrial in there, the lot is what separates it from the residential use on the other side of the street in the park.
Ultimately, just to be very pithy and answer your question, there's a couple ways you can go about dealing with this. You can either make a recommendation for all the uses based on what's been required. You could make the recommendation based on the specific use that the applicant has based on his clients. And if they want to add uses, they could come back to this board and to council to add uses, because that's another way to get at this, where they get the zoning with limited uses, and if they want to add there's still a public hearing to add those other uses. So that is an option that you have. But, other than that, there's very little that you can do with regards to moving forward.
And Ms. Jarrett, if I could also respond, because Ms. Wilson's 100% correct. If it's approved for Safavia, it's approved for any other future user. It's not personal to that user. It applies throughout. We have stood before MPC before where we actually do restrict the property, whether it be through uses, hours of operation, entrances, exits. There are a whole host of ways that you can restrict what we do at the site. But I think Jeff said it best, it is a mother may I. When we come to you, and we do have to come back to you, when we come back to you at that point in time, and some of you will be on this board and some of you will not be on this board, you'll tell us what those development standards are that you think need to be in place. We have to abide by them. So I want to make sure everyone understands that Mrs. Wilson's comments are 100% correct, but you have the power to make them right. On the other hand, we are currently zoned commercial for 220 acres. And we really don't need your permission to load this place up right now with commercial. But the 120 acres, as Jeff mentioned to you, this rectangular piece, you could fit Savannah Mall. People don't realize how big these sites are. This 120-acre site will hold the Savannah Mall and then some more out parcels than even the Savannah Mall has. And this site, C-17, currently is 100 acres. It literally fits the Oglethorpe Mall, and we can just plop it on there and show it to you, plus additional out parcels. I think it's on the first page of Brad's report, He's basically saying we've had this godly PUD since 1998, and in the last 26 years, the world has changed. I think retail has changed, Amazon has made us change. Has anyone been to Oglethorpe Mall lately? You'll see the Sears building is down because there was no need for Sears. Has anyone been to Savannah Mall lately? You can hear a pin drop. My point, though, is that when I grew up in Savannah, Savannah Mall was the place to be, and Oglethorpe Mall is where we hung out. There's really not a need for 220 acres of retail anymore. I'm not even sure, y'all tell me, what would y'all put there for 220 acres? So when we came to MPC staff, we said, look, how do we go about it? What's the first step? And the first step we heard from the neighbors is promise us that there's going to be housing. So we took C-17 completely off the map for consideration. We said, there will not be industrial there. They said, prove it to us. How do you know? So we went ahead and we've redone the plan to show that we'll keep commercial on Highland and on the ramp coming off of the expressway, off of Jimmy DeLoach actually, off of 95. But the rest of it's going to be committed to residential. We don't know what that residential will look like. It could be multifamily, it could be single family, it could be rent to own, but it's coming back to you as residential, and you will have a second and a third bite of the apple. But on the other side, we're going to have big retail on Benton, so that there cannot be any access to Benton other than that shopping center. And we thought it doesn't make sense to have residential on the backside of a shopping center, because you'll have your own set of trucks and your own set of stuff going on. So we thought it just made great sense to put industrial in the middle and have commercial as the wings on Highlands and on Benton with truck traffic, only to have access to Jimmy DeLoach. And that's why, and poor Jeff Jepson's been to more meetings than we all care to admit, but over the years, we're in the 10 to 15 meetings. This has been going on for a very long time. And so you should have gotten a letter from Jasmine Polly, who's the president of the Highlands Neighborhood Association. She doesn't represent everybody. She represents the association. And she said, and I'm just reading from her email to y'all, it's important to acknowledge how far we have come. What was once a proposal for a massive expansion of warehouse space has now evolved into a more balanced plan. And that's what this is. There's some industrial, but this is a balanced plan that includes commercial, retail, residential, and smaller scale industrial components. These changes reflect the developer's willingness to listen and adapt. I don't know that I could have said it any better than the president of Highlands Neighborhood Association. This is what we see happening. And we see this as an appropriate development pattern for 2024 and years to come. Leaving this whole thing as a C2 in the godly PD with no development standards is out of control. And I have no idea what I would put on 220 acres. Maybe y'all do, but I have no idea. Pick a store. A grocery store is 50,000 square feet. What do I do with the other 219 acres? I just have no idea. So that's why we're here. But everyone, I hope you will understand this is not the last step. This is practically the first step. We go from here to City Council to see if they agree with you. And then every step of the way, as we go pod by pod by pod, we'll be back here. And if there are restrictions, Ms. Wilson, and I don't know what those may be, we're here to listen. And whatever's appropriate is appropriate. And by the way, even the commercial, you might want to put some restrictions. If there's a grocery store and we have trucks coming to the back of the grocery store 24/7, that may also be an issue. So I don't want you to think that it's just industrial that will be under review. We are aware that when we come back, everything's under review. As Mr. Jepson said, it's a mother may I. So we come to you with a recommendation for approval, not only from the Homeowners Association, but from MPC staff. With that, I'll close. Thank you.
More questions?
Did I understand you earlier to say that the residents that have all submitted these letters against this project, had not seen the most recent configuration of the commercial site?
I can't speak, as Mr. Yellen said, not everybody is part of the Highlands Neighborhood Association. What I can tell you is everyone who attended those meetings with that association, to include the meetings with that president and city staff, have seen this iteration of the plan.
Jeff, was it you who said that?
Yes, but
Yeah, the last
anybody who happened to live in Godley Station is free to send a letter.
Right, I understand that, but I guess my question is, since this has been changed, have there been meetings held?
Yes.
Yes, there have.
Yeah, the very last community meetings we included all of this. I think somebody said that this plan was not sent with the DRI only, but all of the residents that were invited, the city council, city, everybody that we've met with, MPC, have all seen this plan.
Okay.
In fact, they chose this plan. They selected because we had all warehouses and side-by-side studies on traffic counts for both the residential plan and the industrial, and they said, no, we want this. That was their choice.
And if I may, that's why the reference is to the DRI plan that was approved in October,
Mr. Wellwood?
because that's what everybody's seen.
There's a lot of rumors out there that are very negative, that are completely unfounded, and completely out of context to what they're presenting here. It's just somebody hears one piece and it just goes around the community. And there's a lot of hypersensitivity to that, and a lot of bad information out there that's going around. So, and I'm trying to correct it, but,
It is a difficult situation for the residents out there. There's the whole Effingham Parkway thing, the traffic situation in general, both on-site and off-site surrounding, is challenging. We recognize that. We also recognize that we're not going to get unanimous. Not everybody can show up to the meetings and really think about and collaborate and talk and understand. We've met people individually and privately. We've met with, the big groups. We've met with city council. And so I think our plan is going to be part of the solution for this particular area.
I have one more question to ask. So in Ms. Polly's letter, there was quite a lot of community requests that none of it will be guaranteed. Has there been any talk about a community benefit agreement that could be?
Ms. Wilson, there are two letters. I don't know if the one received today is part of that packet. The one that you're looking at is what was carried to the meeting between MPC staff, the developer, and city staff.
Okay.
And what they were confused about is what is in this commission and the city's purview to enforce and do. And it was unclear. And so there are things that they can do for themselves as a homeowners association. There are things and promises that can be kept by the city that the planning commission has no authority to do. So it was a detangling and deconflicted by the list, which is what generated the second letter. I apologize.
Other comments?
I will say, to add to that, on the community benefit piece, just as an aside, I think is the city, speaking from the city, for the city, as some of these developments start coming down the pipeline, and of course it's all contingent upon what this body recommends and what city council decides, is we try to see where the benefit could be if a developer is going to be able, like in this case, to improve the utility of the road network for the first 1,000 feet along Highlands Boulevard, whether or not there are opportunities with the developer to invest in the city park that Mr. Jepson's been talking about. Is just a piece of land right now. It isn't a park, but the community desperately needs a park, and the city needs to put a park there, and to see whether or not there are opportunities when these developments arise to see how much help or support these developers will give to provide those amenities there. And I think that the city will work with this project, just like it does with others, to try to get as much public good out of the development as possible.
Well, and like the fact that we have to come back before this board for each particular parcel, we also have to go back before the city and enter a development agreement that addresses the road, the infrastructure, the improvements, the coordination and collaboration to get access to and from the park and that road. So all of that will be documented and negotiated, with the city as well.
Will that connector road be negotiated and?
That's all part of it, yes, ma'am. So
The
part of that
connector
connector
road in
road comes through
between-
our property. And so if you look right in here, so it doesn't, you can't really get straight out here. What we're trying to do is align this intersection with a second intersection for these residents so that these residents have a second entrance and egress. And so by aligning that, this here is all part of that access road, and then this is an access road too. So yes, there's a global discussion on honestly, we've met, one of the councilwomen for the city has been, championing setting up all of these meetings, Councilwoman Lanier, and we've had discussions, just like, at some point, they have to tell us what their request is. We've heard things about some sidewalks, we've heard things about cooperating on the park, we've heard things about this, but nobody's actually asked what that is yet, but because I think people were just trying to figure out the master plan, which is what's happening here, and once that figures out, then we can tell them yes, no, maybe, or you're crazy, or absolutely, respond appropriately to the request.
Okay. All right. We do have residents who spoke earlier, and at least one who would like to speak again, and one who has not spoken. I'm going to give Mr. Kendall an opportunity. Would you like to share anything more? Okay, thank you. And Blake, are you there? Would you like to share again? 2 minutes, please. State your name for the record.
Yes, this is Blake Allen. So Jimmy DeLoach, as we're talking about traffic here, where these warehouses are going is exactly where the traffic starts. If you work in downtown Savannah and you have to take your route home, the best way is to go to Garden City on this road on the board through Jimmy DeLoach. Once you reach to the highway where the bridge starts, traffic's already starting. So you're sitting in your car for about an hour already as it is. And where the traffic is ending is exactly where these warehouses are going, right at that traffic light on Benton Road. So if you have these warehouses right here, I'm telling you, traffic's gonna be nonstop, probably gonna double it. You're gonna be having semi trucks either pulling in, pulling out. I mean, we're talking about probably double the traffic right there. Also, it's just, I know you guys can't grasp the concept of this piece of land where it is. This is a beautiful piece of land. They purposely made it a commercial piece of land for a reason, because there is probably 2,000 home developments going on right now. You've got industrial areas, there's nothing but warehouses already down there. We need commercial land at this property. There's really nowhere else on the road that's gonna allow this commercial property to be as good as what is here. So we really need this to stay what it is. I know it's a lot of land. Maybe we said one in a warehouse in the back, but we need the front section, because where the commercial property is, where they're trying to put it at, that's not really a good piece of land right there. You'd have to take a right onto Highlands Avenue, you'd have to take a right on Benton Avenue, it's gonna be hard to pull in and out. The best place for the commercial property is where these warehouses are going. I think we're making a massive mistake here. I think traffic's gonna be horrible. And I do not think, as a resident, I never received a letter. I'm a part of the home association. I've never been notified about this. I don't think residents even know about this. I'm just speaking up for everybody. I think this is an awful idea. That's just my point.
Thank you. I've got one more. Manny Z. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, please state your name for the record.
My name is Manny Z. I'm actually a member of the Highlands Neighborhood Association. I had a question that was brought by one of the commissioners. With the SAD ordinance that was commented earlier, what's the penalty for continuously breaking the ordinance? The only reason I'm asking is there was a property that was recently converted for warehousing for the Amazon Fulfillment Center, and residents in that particular area had a lot of what they're really angry about that. Though if I understand there's an ordinance and people come and measure it, and if it's loud, yeah, they're fine. But is that the full wherewithal or the full control of that, just paying a fine, or is it more?
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Go ahead.
Sir, I'm happy, this is Jay Melder, the city manager of Savannah. We're happy to follow up on that complaint, but let me please just make sure that I understand it, that the warehouses either connected to or adjacent to the Amazon distribution center are causing a noise nuisance? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, we do have a noise ordinance, and there are fines associated with that. And we will follow up on that complaint and see if we can't get some more information and compliance with that noise ordinance. I'd also like to point out that at any time, you can call or use the 311 app to note any issue that you think is arising with the ordinance. But I'll make sure that we follow up on that complaint, sir.
Thank you. All right, would you like an opportunity to rebut?
Yes, that is not surprising. The most significant and repeated comment we hear is traffic. There is absolutely traffic issues there, but I can assure you we have holistically looked at this and the improvements that we are making, and I'm happy to send that to the board. The board has exhibits with that, it's just not in the presentation. And it shows the current configuration and the new configuration, and then we hire outside consultants to do level of service studies for intersections during peak times and non-peak times. And it's solving a math problem, right? We take into account all of the current traffic counts plus the projected traffic counts plus a safety factor in there. And there is a significant improvement in the level of service and traffic and flow on just the improvements that we plan to make as part of this development, not including the future improvements that the city and DOT are contemplating on both Benton and Highlands.
Thank you.
Yes,
As an engineer in the past, municipal engineer in the past, I can say that connections are the best way to alleviate traffic congestion. If they have another way to go, it improves things significantly. I moved into the Thomas Square neighborhood because I have a lot of different ways to get where I want to go. You know, I can go in any direction and there's access.
Yeah.
So,
Can I ask one more thing, Madam Chair?
Sure.
How agreeable would you be to work with the residents for putting up some other kind of barrier, sound barrier than what is currently on the books? I know that the city has been working with different groups to amend the industrial buffers because, you know, what's currently on the books was not, we didn't anticipate for what happened with the industrial warehouse boom. And, you know, abutting industrial next to residential with what is currently on the books is, we have seen time and time again that it's been disastrous for this community. So there's a need for remediation for those codes. So, and they haven't been codified yet. We're working on that. How agreeable would you be to having a condition, this board placing a condition for a sound barrier for those residents that will be abutting?
Yeah, so absolutely. So the right way to do it is for us to do a study of exactly what those distances are, what those decibels would be, that would give us a baseline with no barrier, and then have somebody, an authority, tell us what is the standard that they're trying to achieve, and then we can design the barrier for the right height and the right materials, whether it's a berm and vegetation or whether it's a sound wall. You know, each one has its pluses and minuses. That a sound wall is not overly aesthetically pleasing. But if there is a standard that you guys have already identified that you're working towards, we can absolutely agree. But it's hard to just agree to something that without you giving me a standard, you know? But absolutely, as part of the normal course of business, our design will at a minimum meet the current ordinance, and whatever language you want to put in for us to cooperate and install additional sound attenuation along residential parcels, we're happy to, you know, agree to that language.
Okay.
I just don't know exactly what it would be without knowing a standard.
Okay, yes, and maybe someone more experienced can help write that condition into this.
But you will have a point, you will have the ability to put that condition in when we come back
Yes.
with that plan as well.
Okay.
That's
You
the
will.
point. That's the point I was just going to raise, I think. To your point, to your concern, those are the types of things that we would typically apply during the general development plan.
Okay.
Anything else?
I would just like to add that I appreciate that NUZO is being incorporated into this because it's a playbook that we put in place. It's not a perfect document, but it's a good outline. So I appreciate that it's been considered with this change.
Anything else? I'm open for a motion.
Cole's motion to approve staff's recommendation with the 5 included conditions.
Second by Joe Welch.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Ms. Amick?
Yes.
Ms. Bowles?
Yes.
Mr. Coles?
Yes.
Mr. Kegler?
Yes.
Mr. Melder?
Yes.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes.
Mr. Notrika?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Welch?
Yes.
Mr. Wywoody?
Yes.
I too say yes. Motion passes. All right, thank you. I think we're done, aren't we?
Cole's motion to adjourn.
If I may, I just wanted to, just a point of reference, I wanted to take the opportunity to hand out these calendars that staff has worked on. It's the title, we always have a theme. This year's theme was Sacred Grounds and Untold Resting Places. So it is looking at all the cemeteries, some you know about and some you might not know about throughout Chatham County and Savannah. And I want to thank the staff. I think a lot of them are actually in here that worked on the calendar. There's Sadie and, let's see. There's Caitlin, who's with HPC, Veronica Cox, Kelly Mitchell, Bree Morgan, David Ramsey. And David Ramsey is our guru. He is the graphic artist that has all of our stuff looking fantastic. So we wouldn't know what we would do without him. And Kieran. So I want to thank all of them, but I also wanted to make sure that I gave you opportunity to get this before the new year started. And the other thing is, I sent out a notice about new goods. So if you didn't bring anything this time, I sent you that off. I don't know where the email went to, but
I got 2 of them. I brought something.
we are like in good for tomorrow. So if you get a chance to know it, I'm going to
What's the last date on the collection?
probably to the end of the year.
Okay. Now Cole's motion to adjourn.
Okay. Second? All in favor? Aye. All right.